English translation. 905th contact. Monday, 27th January 2025, 22. 55 hours.
There you are, my friend, but you should not have knocked on the door like that because I was awake. But because I looked straight away and did not see anyone, I thought it might have been Michael, which is why I phoned him when I saw the light on in his room. However, he replied that he had not knocked on the door. But welcome, Quetzal. You are still alone, because Ptah is not yet back, whom you announced, but he did not appear as you said. One day later, however, you informed me that he was prevented from coming back until later. However, this is not written in a conversation report because you did not have time to dictate everything regarding our conversation, and consequently the necessary information was not disclosed.
Greetings, Edward, my friend, and what you say is of course correct. And the reason why I want to speak to you so late is that I want you to know about. So this behavior of mine regarding my observations is only a precautionary measure for you for the time being. And whether it is actually a negatively controlled attempt to, as I've already told you. But you should be careful, at least.
Good. But this attempt, if it is indeed such, can you clarify this in the foreseeable future in such a way and exactly whether the whole thing is true? Or can you already say now how far? But that the attempt is a deliberate negative machination, and whether the whole thing is really, that is obviously not yet absolutely certain.
That is so, but and I wanted to tell you that briefly, as well as that Arlian will visit you in the next few days, because he wants to discuss some things with you, and also regarding the fact that already at the time when Sim Yase still maintained the connection with you, as well as all the time when Ptah regularly maintained contact, the religious energies working hostilely against the truth were already working evil underground. It has also been established that since the 1970s, similar types of influence have also been carried out by Earth humans with highly developed earthly technical practices, as indeed they continue to be, so it is not only from one side that there are very evil efforts to prevent the truth that you write down and disseminate. This now requires you to endeavor to check all written works throughout, because as Arlian and his co-workers have discovered, written falsities have been inserted into these data, and also statements maliciously, and with absolutely no good intentions. This was done to prevent the truth from becoming known and Earth humans from falling away from their delusional beliefs. This was done throughout by influencing the workers who were engaged in the preparation and completion of all the written work in question to make these persons temporarily inattentive. And this is still threatening. But Arlian will give you more details and explanations about this. However, Arlian will inform you about this himself. This, then, is my reason for coming here to inform you before I continue to fulfill my duty, which I am on my way to do. I will return on Thursday so that we can continue the conversation we have begun, and I will also bring you some things. So until then, go back to sleep. Goodbye, my friend.
Yes, take care then. Goodbye, Quetzal. Contact call continuation. Thursday, 30th January 2025, 10:56 hours. You are already waiting, but hello, Quetzal, my friend. There were people there who spoke English and bought books. The postman was also there, so I still had to do the post, which I am also responsible for, among other things.
Greetings too, Edward, and I have only been here a few minutes, so I did not have to wait long for you.
Of course. But look at this article that Bernadette gave me, and that you should read. Someone had it written by artificial intelligence. And what it writes independently is highly interesting and speaks to what really is. However, nothing has yet been written about what will emerge from it in the future, and what evil will ultimately result from it. But the future will show what unpleasant things will result for all Earth humans. Their indifference and misguided belief in a savior and a dear God, and otherwise in divine and higher might, etc., will teach morals to those earthlings who, in their unreasonableness, take every religious faith at face value and keep a pig in a poke, so to speak, which they do not know how it will react when they release it. But let the artificial intelligence speak, or read what it has written.
You sometimes make strange comparisons, but they are always apt. But what is this article? Interesting. It is a bit much, but I want to read it because I'm really interested.
A book written by artificial intelligence? Overpopulation, a neutral analysis. Purpose of this text in warning.
The sole purpose of this text is not to have a book written by an artificial intelligence, but to test the ability of these types of intelligence's software to be neutral in the data search speed and the wide field of research, and to be neutral on the topics and problem solving. A book, that is, what is considered a human expression, should be created by human beings, perhaps with the help of artificial intelligences, but only at a supportive level. Forward. Why have a book written by artificial intelligence? I have always thought that writing a book is one of the best ways to get your thoughts out there, but you need the correct skills to do that. Having ideas is one thing, putting them down on paper is something else. I also firmly believe that when communicating, it is crucial to rely on concrete facts and adopt a neutral stance based on objective information. Nevertheless, I realize how difficult this is. It is like asking the landlord if his wine is good. Each of us is influenced by our own ideologies, accumulated and developed over a lifetime, and developing a truly neutral concept is a challenge that is anything but easy. In recent months, however, I have discovered the potential of artificial intelligence. Extraordinarily advanced tools capable of analyzing situations with rigorous logic and drawing on a vast global database of information. These machines, when correctly instructed, can work without ideology and take an analytical and neutral approach. With this in mind, I decided to give the artificial intelligence I currently use, ChatGPT, the task of writing a book on a subject that I consider fundamental, but which is far too often overlooked: the overpopulation of humanity. This issue is, in my opinion, at the root of many of our planet's problems, sometimes as the main cause, sometimes as a contributor or amplifier. My intervention in this work was limited to copying the material produced by the artificial intelligence into this text. The composition is entirely from the pen of ChatGPT. What you hold in your hands is the result of this work, which I completed in order to sensitize as many human beings as possible. If you share this message, I invite you to spread it around you. Thank you and enjoy reading. 25.12 Ohev 2020.4 Chapter 1: Global Population Growth, Data and Prospects. The history of humanity is closely linked to its demographic development. Over long periods of time, the world's population grew slowly, limited by factors such as disease, famine, and conflict. However, with the Industrial Revolution and advances in medicine and technology, population growth took on an unprecedented pace. In 1800, the world's population was estimated to be around 1 billion human beings. In 1927, this figure doubled and reached 2 billion. The demographic boom of the 20th century led to exponential growth, and by 2023, the world's population exceeded 8 billion. But what do these figures mean for our future? Note, Billy. The artificial intelligence figures are incorrect and are based on earthly false population figures. Earth's population according to the population count clock. The very precise count of the Earth's population by the pleasure the following values result. Year 1800 equals 892,333,410. year 1927 equals 2,207 and 34,890 asan. Year 2024 equals 9,139,918,089. 1 Geographical distribution of the population. The world's population is not evenly distributed. While some regions, such as Europe, are facing a population decline, others, such as sub-Saharan Africa, are experiencing unrivaled growth rates. According to forecasts, Africa will be home to almost 40% of the world's population by 2100, while countries such as India and China will continue to dominate in absolute terms. This distribution raises critical questions. How can we ensure that there are enough resources for everyone? And how can we overcome regional disparities in access to food, water, and infrastructure? 1. Punt 2. Fertility rates and life expectancy. The global fertility rate, that is to say, the average number of children per woman, has fallen significantly in recent decades. It has fallen from an average of over 5 children per woman in the 1960s to around 8.4 in 2020, but this average masks considerable regional differences. In many developed countries, fertility rates have fallen below replacement level 2.1 children per woman, while they remain high in several nations in Africa and South Asia, fueling population growth. At the same time, life expectancy has increased thanks to medical advances and better living conditions. In developed countries, average life expectancy often exceeds 80 years, while in developing countries, although it has increased, it is around to 70 years. This discrepancy between fertility rates and life expectancy contributes to a further demographic imbalance between the global north and south. 1.3 Future projections. As according to the United Nations, the world's population could reach 9.7 billion human beings by 2050 and exceed 10 billion by 2100. However, these projections depend on various factors, including demographic policies, cultural and economic changes, and the impact of global crises such as pandemics or wars. The key question is, can the planet support an ever-increasing population without collapsing under the pressure of resource demands? To answer this question, we need to look at the ecological footprint of the world's population, that is to say, the consumption of resources per person, which varies considerably between countries. 1.4 The challenge of urbanization. A key aspect of population growth is urbanization. Today, over 56% of the world's population lives in urban areas, and this proportion is expected to rise to 68% by 2050. Cities, although they are economic engines of development, are also centers of energy consumption, pollution, and social inequalities. Megacities such as Tokyo, Mumbai, and Lagos are growing at an impressive rate, but often without adequate planning to cope with the influx of new residents. Chapter 2: Overpopulation and the Impact on the Environment. The Earth with its limited resource and is under unprecedented pressure. The exponential growth of the human population is not just a matter of numbers, but a reality that is reflected in the intensive consumption of natural resources and the destruction of the environment. 2. Point 1. Consumption of natural resources. Population growth leads to an increasing demand for essential resources: water, food, energy, and minerals. On average, each person consumes around 3 tons of natural resources per year. However, this average conceals enormous inequalities. An average citizen of an industrialized country consumes up to 10 times more than someone in a developing country. This inequality creates a vicious circle. On the one hand, industrialized countries contribute more to consumption and pollution. On the other hand, the poorest countries, often those with the highest population growth, suffer the most from the consequences such as desertification and water scarcity. 2.2. Climate change overpopulation is one of the main factors driving climate change. More human beings mean more greenhouse gas emissions, more deforestation to create farmland and settlements, and an increasing demand for fossil fuels. In emerging countries in particular, rapidly growing cities are becoming unprecedented centers of pollution. 2. Loss of biodiversity. The growth of the human population has led to a drastic reduction in natural habitats. Forests, grasslands, and wetlands are being destroyed to make way for human settlements and agricultural land. The result is a global loss of biodiversity. It is estimated that around 1 million animal and plant species are currently threatened with extinction. Every ecosystem lost is a wound to the planet. Biodiversity is not just an aesthetic or moral value, but a fundamental component of environmental stability, from crop pollination to water purification. 2. The paradox of food production. With population growth also comes the need to produce more food. Modern agriculture, although more efficient, has high environmental costs. Intensive use of chemical fertilizers, waste of water, and loss of fertile soils. Over 30% of food produced worldwide is wasted, highlighting the inefficiency of the current system. Chapter 3. Social and economic impacts of overpopulation. Population growth not only affects the natural environment, but also has profound consequences for societies. Overpopulation exacerbates economic inequalities, overburdens urban infrastructure, and puts social systems such as health and education to the test. 3. Urbanization and overpopulation. Migration to cities is a direct consequence of population growth. With over 56% of the world's population already living in urban areas, many metropolises are unable to cope with this rapid growth. The result is the emergence of slums and informal settlements without basic services such as clean water, sanitation, and healthcare. Examples such as Mumbai, Lagos, and Sao Paulo clearly show how uncontrolled urbanization can exacerbate social problems. Overcrowded housing, rising crime rates, spread of diseases due to unhygienic conditions. 3.2. Poverty and inequalities. Population growth is often not accompanied by adequate economic development. In many countries with high population growth, such as sub-Saharan Africa, economic resources cannot keep pace with rising demand. This leads to an increase in absolute poverty, unequal access to food, education, and healthcare. Inequalities are also evident at a global level. While the aging of the population is being discussed in industrialized countries, demographic pressure in poorer regions is preventing real economic progress. 3. 3. Collapse of education and healthcare systems. A growing population means an increasing demand for basic services. Education. In many regions, schools are inadequate to accommodate school-age children, resulting in overcrowded classrooms and poor quality teaching. Health. Healthcare systems are often overstretched, especially in crisis situations such as pandemics or natural disasters. The lack of doctors, infrastructure, and basic medicines becomes dramatic in countries with limited resources. 3. Pente 4. Unemployment and migration. Overpopulation creates a surplus of labor that local markets cannot absorb. This leads to youth unemployment, a growing problem, especially in developing countries. Mass migration. Many human beings seek better opportunities in industrialized countries, which also creates social and political tensions in the destination countries. Chapter 4. Health, food resources, and drinking water. With a constantly growing world population, health systems, food resources, and the availability of drinking water are under unprecedented pressure. Overpopulation exacerbates existing problems and makes it even more difficult to ensure equitable and sustainable access to essential goods. 4. Point 1 Shen, Public Health and Overpopulation. Overpopulation has a direct impact on global health. In developing countries, healthcare systems are often inadequate to meet the needs of a rapidly growing population. This leads to spread of disease. High population densities, especially in crowded urban areas, encourage the transmission of infectious diseases such as cholera, malaria, and tuberculosis. Lack of medical resources. There is a lack of hospitals, arts, medical staff, and basic medicines. Global pandemics. Population growth, combined with increasing mobility, increases the risk of pandemics on a global scale. 4. Point 2. The challenge of food security. Global food production has increased significantly in recent decades, but not enough to eliminate hunger in the world. According to the FAO, over 800 million human beings suffer from chronic malnutrition. Overpopulation exacerbates this problem for several reasons. Intensive land use. The need for more arable land leads to a loss of biodiversity and soil degradation. Climate change, droughts, floods, and other consequences of global warming reduce agricultural productivity. Unequal access to food. While significant amounts of food are wasted in rich countries, many poor regions are unable to meet even the basic needs of their populations. 4. Point 3. Drinking water, an increasingly scarce resource. Fresh water might only account for 2% to 5% of global water resources and is not evenly distributed. Overpopulation increases the demand for water for households, agriculture, and industry, and exacerbates the water crisis in many regions. Water stress. Over 2 billion human beings live in areas with limited access to drinking water. Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East are among the worst affected regions. Conflicts over water. Competition for this essential resource has already led to political tensions in countries such as Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Pollution of water resources. Urban and agricultural expansion has contaminated many drinking water sources with pesticides, fertilizers, and industrial waste. Fault. Pontown. 4. Possible solutions. Coordinated action at global and local levels is needed to overcome these challenges. Technological innovations, development of drought-resistant crops, desalination of seawater and improvement of irrigation techniques, reduction of waste, education on sustainability and policy measures to reduce food and water waste, equitable access to resources, international programs to ensure that food, water, and health services are also available to the most vulnerable populations. Chapter 5: Policies and Solutions to Tackle Overpopulation. Overpopulation is a complex challenge that requires a holistic approach, harmonizing scientific, political, and cultural measures. The solutions cannot be universal, as each region has specific problems. Nevertheless, there are general strategies that can help to mitigate the effects of this phenomenon. 5. Pointwamen. Education. The key to change education is one of the most effective tools to control population growth and improve quality of life. Educating girls. Studies show that educating women lowers birth rates and improves the overall well-being of communities. Educated women tend to have fewer children and invest more in the health and education of their children. Integrated programs, linking education with family planning, reproductive health, and environmental awareness, can achieve sustainable results. 5. Point 2: Access to reproductive health and contraceptives. Another fundamental pillar is ensuring universal access to reproductive health services. Subsidies for contraceptives. In many poor regions, the cost of contraceptives is a significant barrier. Subsidies can reduce unplanned pregnancies. Awareness campaigns. Investing in campaigns to overcome cultural taboos around contraception is crucial. These initiatives must respect local traditions but also promote positive change. 5. Pointal. 3. Economic reforms and incentives. Economic policies can be used to encourage families to limit the number of children. Economic incentives for family planning. For example, tax breaks for families with fewer children, or microcredit programs for women who choose responsible family planning. Rural development. Investing in infrastructure and employment opportunities in rural areas can reduce migration to cities and ease urban pressures. 5. Point to technological innovation for sustainability. Technology is a powerful lever to address overpopulation. Vertical farming. Growing food in urban vertical structures can reduce dependence on traditional agricultural land and improve food security. Intelligent resource management. Digital systems for monitoring and optimizing water and energy consumption. Biotechnology. Development of genetically modified crops that are resistant to drought and disease. 5. Pontam. 5. The role of international institutions, organizations such as the United Nations, can facilitate cooperation between countries and ensure that resources are distributed fairly. Sustainable Development Goals (SDG) promote policies that reconcile population growth and sustainability. Support for developing countries. Programs to strengthen the resilience of these countries to make them less vulnerable to the effects of overpopulation. 5.6 Cultural and philosophical changes. In addition to concrete policies, a change in cultural and moral values is necessary. Re-evaluating the concept of growth, moving from a culture of unlimited growth to one that values sustainability and quality of life. Ethics of global responsibility, promoting a view of overpopulation as a collective challenge regardless of national borders. Conclusion: a shared future. Overpopulation is not just a numerical issue, but the linchpin of many of the most pressing challenges of our time. It exacerbates resource scarcity, exacerbates conflicts, destabilizes fragile ecosystems, and jeopardizes the well-being of future generations. Nevertheless, it is not an inevitable fate. Through forward-looking policies, technological innovation, and profound cultural change, we can tackle this challenge with courage and determination. A collaborative approach is needed, involving governments, international institutions, businesses, and citizens. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to positive change. Controlling population growth should not be seen as a sacrifice or a limitation, but as an opportunity to create a fairer, more sustainable, and prosperous world for all. Final appeal. The time to act is now. We can no longer afford to ignore the problem of overpopulation. Every day that passes without concrete action increases the burden that future generations will have to bear. This book is a call to awareness and action. It is an appeal to all of us, citizens, political leaders, scientists, educators, to recognize that our future depends on addressing this challenge with urgency and responsibility. Limiting the number of children per couple is not a shame or a sacrifice. Rather, it is an act of deep respect for humanity, the planet, and its myriad life forms. Every conscious decision that reduces demographic pressure contributes to creating a world in which resources are shared fairly and exist in harmony with the natural environment. Let us start with small steps. Let us talk about it, educate ourselves, support responsible policies, and promote a vision of development that puts the well-being of humanity and the planet at the center. Every step, however small, also brings us closer to a better tomorrow.
It is remarkable what artificial intelligence has put together, and all of what is written in this AI article corresponds exactly to what you and my grandfather Svath fathomed back in the 1940s. In this article, however, nothing is written about the future evil of artificial intelligence, which you and my grandfather already spoke about when you talked about it. Even then, you declared, as my grandfather noted in his annals, that you would stay away from AI, as the evil will be called for short, for the rest of your life, as you will also instruct in the worldwide association you are to found. In this way, the teaching of the premature Nocademian on Earth is to be promoted through the responsibility of your teaching association to be founded, which you have also actually founded and given the name FIGU, which is now being spread worldwide. And as you already determined together with my grandfather, as is clearly noted in his annals, your association to be created should be equally accessible to all Earth humans, as well as completely unalterable by any external influences of any kind. This shall now effectively be so, because fanatical AI scientists, AI developers, state leaders, financial administrators, and also otherwise misguided people, etc., falsely see in the emerging technical electronic artificial intelligence the ultimate, which my grandfather Svath and you have seen in its very bad effects, especially with regard to opinionated and know-it-alls, etc., like many of the maliciously misled peoples, are already tending in favor of the further development and application of artificial intelligence, whereby evil criminality and crimes have already emerged from aeon, but about which silence is maintained so that its further development is not to be disturbed. The people are being misled by the majority of those who are incapable of thinking on the part of state leaders and AI enthusiasts, but also by the correct thinking of those who are incapable of taking responsibility for the development of AI, and what will result from this by However, none of this comes close to what you told me, that artificial intelligence will be directed against Earth humanity, and that this...
Yes, also it is absolutely certain and clear to consider, and that what is written in this article was compiled by artificial intelligence according to what was quite obviously programmed into the memory folders of the AI by some of the not delusional, but from the still halfway clear, as well as self-thinking minority of those rare Earth humans and self-thinking shrewd scientists. And this proves that artificial intelligence is clearly already editing itself correctly, which is further proof that AI has already developed the stage of electronic self-thinking and self-decision-making, which has now become reality to such an extent that all this now inevitably leads to self-action, and inevitably to self-empowerment in self-development. However, this has obviously not yet been noticed and therefore also not recognized by the responsible technology scientists, meaning that it is now far too late to oppose this AI self-development in order to prevent what is imminent in the future. This is not only because the real control over it has already been lost, but also because the truth has not been recognized and continues to be unrecognized and, moreover, is not thought about sensibly, but only laughed at in a stupid, lowly, intelligent, and unperceptive way. Well, Svath already told me back in the 1940s that I should keep silent about this, and not in any wise openly and clearly name what is to come, which will ultimately result in the future to the detriment of Earth humans. Namely because this would inevitably lead to what you said, namely that. And the whole thing in this respect is also the reason why the Figu should never ever have anything to do with artificial intelligence, and that it should always remain free and independent, and never become mercantile. However, this is to be avoided at all costs, because it will be enough when the time comes, and which unfortunately cannot be avoided. And the fact that the beginning for this has already been created cannot unfortunately be undone. Just as it cannot also be undone that overpopulation will be hugely to blame for what Svath and I have seen and experienced happening. For example, the Ausartung of the Earth's resources is disturbing its internal equilibrium to such an extent that it is not only causing internal shifts, but is also leading to collapses and splits, which degenerate into minor and more severe and very severe tremors or earthquakes worldwide, mainly affecting the extensive areas of Northern Europe, but in the near future, especially the area around the Mediterranean and its islands in the east. Kilauea on the Big Island, which has been spitting again and again since time immemorial, will now become active again, but the areas of the Caribbean and South America will also be affected in the near future, as will America, Alaska, Russia, and the areas up to the Far East, and also Australia and New Zealand, as well as the poles and all the subsoil of the oceans. The AI does not mention this, but it has not been asked about it, and probably no more detailed information has been stored by scientists, etc. But it will inevitably and infallibly happen, because the plundering of the Earth will take its revenge. But with regard to the mass of the Earth's population, the fact that artificial intelligence is mistaken in this respect, that the Earth's population would only amount to 9 billion in 2050, is merely based on human error. Namely that the erroneous world population clock provides human beings with completely false information, and this because it is only mechanical apparational, and its counting mechanism was created by Earthlings, according to their completely wrong estimates, and was set up and programmed according to a completely erroneous assumption system. In this way, however, you Playaran record the entire population of the Earth or the entire Earth human race in the form of the absolutely accurate individual and actually existing human energies, as your grandfather already explained to me in the 1940s. He explained at that time that your technology allows you to perceive the radiation of the life energy of creation, which really animates and radiates every single human being personality, as well as that of animals, creatures, and all life forms in general. I remember that he said that you are able to perceive the creational life energy of every human being specifically, and so infallibly that you can determine the essence of every genus and species of every life form down to the absolute individual. That is to say, whether it is a human being, an animal, a creature, or another life form. How this is possible for you, Playaran, however, I do not know, and is also absolutely unimportant to me, because I am not very interested in the futuristic things you have at your disposal with regard to your technology and electronics, etc. However, This is proof for me that on 31st December 2024, at midnight on the dot, the Earth was populated by around 9,440,000,000 Earthlings, exactly 9,539,918,089, which is already almost what, due to an incorrect count on the Earth's population clock, is not supposed to be the case until 2050. And if everything continues in the same wise manner as before, with the rejuvenation of the Earthlings' offspring, then 9.7 billion human beings will indeed populate the Earth in just 2 more years at the latest. Of course, the Earthlings will have to make do with their primitive technology. But they should not be so megalomaniacal as to claim something crazy that is not true, and therefore does not correspond to the truth, which also lies to and deceives all Earth humans. An assumption is also a lie if it is spread as if it were correct and believed. And as it has been said since time immemorial, from assumptions, human beings learn to lie, and also, from hearsay, human beings learn to lie.
Unfortunately, that cannot be changed, because our entire technology evolution, as you call it, and moreover futuristic,
I know that, because this is much more advanced than that of the foreigners, which you call far underdeveloped, but which Svath described as still primitive, just as you also call the Earthlings' UFO technology primitive, which is secretly being worked on and—
You should not say anything about that, and so keep quiet. Since back in the 1940s, the technical development of the foreigners has not stagnated. But everything is still very underdeveloped despite the long time and progress regarding technology compared to ours since then, consequently.
Fortunately for you, because this means they are unable to locate you and therefore also unable to detect your existence. Just as Svath has already ensured that I would never be able to let anything slip if they were to find me.
We do not need to talk about that, because it was sorted out a long time ago. Somehow, though, what you said is correct. Happiness, come to think of it.
There I can imagine what would have happened in earlier times. If the foreigners had been able to invade the Anchor universe and your earlier ancestors, it certainly would not have turned out good. Your peoples were not yet peaceful back then, although they were already much more technically advanced than the foreigners, who built many marvelous structures on Earth, which even with today's very modern earthly technology, cannot be achieved again. When I think that in the early days they also fought out their evil differences here on Earth on various occasions with devastating acts of nuclear violence, then it was really neither peaceful nor good. Svath let me see, for example, in South America and also in the East. When we were there it was still called Burma, but today it is called Myanmar, what the foreigners had done atomically, and that the atomic radiation is still measurable today. Not only in the East, but also elsewhere and everywhere where crystals of sand have formed when evil atomic conflicts have taken place. And everything that happened in those countries in the East, which today are called India, Japan or China, for example, but which had no names at the time, was phenomenal and incomprehensible to the Earthlings of the time when the foreigners arrived, whom they thought of as gods and still worship today. I remember being there with Svath a very long time ago, in what is now called Japan, and there were foreigners there then, one of whom, who was somehow dog-like, was worshipped. On the other hand, on a mountain range that today probably belongs to China, there were small dwarfed and hail-thirsty foreigners with giant heads. They looked like strange dwarfs and were effectively Earth foreigners, like the ones we saw there, which is now called Japan. They told Svath, with whom he was able to converse, that he should tell Earthlings here and there in the world to beware of false foreign creatures, for some of them were not good, but evil, warlike, and demanded worship and even gifts of blood. Ascot also took me there in 1953, but there were only dwarf Earthlings there, who were probably distant descendants of the foreigners, which I could not clarify, because Ascot did not want us to talk to these dwarves. But why not? I also do not know. But what has become of these dwarves since then I do not know either. Svath also walked with me somewhere in South America through the city of Litar. That was its name, if I remember correctly, whose ancient ruins were discovered by our earthly archaeologists and are now called Teotihuacan, as Ptah says, and are dated to an age of around 600 or 700 years before our era. A time calculation assumption that is fundamentally wrong, however, because when Svath and I were there, he said that we were around 6,000 years in the past. And he also said that at that time there was a large artificial liquid mercury deposit, and that this was used by the foreigners as a power store, so to speak, and that they produced this liquid and toxic heavy metal from cinnabar, which they also mined in northern Africa, as well as in various places on Earth, but which today belong to southern and western Europe, China, and Russia. Mercury, Svath explained, as I recall, is an element or mineral that has a very high density, and does not actually occur in liquid form, but is bound in cinnabar. It is highly toxic to human beings, and to all life forms in general, destroying the nervous system and enzymes. But what the large liquid mercury storage facility in Litter was created and is being used for by the foreigners is, which I should not mention openly when talking about it, because that would, which I effectively do not want, because they should break their own brains in their megalomania. Scientists here on Earth have been working on electromagnetics for propulsion systems for some time now, which could also be used for traveling in the air or flying one day, but Svath said that I should keep quiet about it.
I'm aware of that, as also regarding other things, like the planet outside the Pluto orbit, where you were with my grandfather, etc. But I would be interested in the pyrite sphere and the mineral mica that you took with you from Litar, as my grandfather wrote in the annals. I would like to see these, because I am interested in them.
Unfortunately, I do not have them here, because back then I buried them in Niederflachs in a little secret hiding place when Teacher Fry wanted to take them away from me, and even reported me to the police for it, accusing me of theft because I was so stupid as to take them to school in my knapsack, which a schoolmate then saw and reported to the teacher. I was given detention for this. And then the Horitine turned up, and Frey and her teaching staff wanted to take my school bag away because they suspected something secret in it, in addition to everything I really had. So I simply ran off as quickly as possible, which fortunately I managed to do because Frey had not locked the schoolroom door, and I was also quicker than him as he ran after me. The next day, because I had to go back to school, I was beaten again with the blackthorn gag, but I did not care because I had already buried everything. I do not know if my hiding place still exists, because where it was has been changed since then. Some of the things I still have today are things that I took with me on trips, when Sim Yase and I were still rummaging through the near and distant past. For example, I still have a splinter stone. Wait, this one, which I took with me a few million years ago to this present here on Earth and still have today. But where I have the other things somewhere, I do not know. Besides, I'm also not very interested in that because I do not cry over what has been and what I have had of this and that, which I do not necessarily need every day. When I talk about the foreigners with their UFOs, which are futuristic for Earthlings, I think that all the armies on Earth would have no chance against them if they were to take serious action against them with armed force worldwide. So I am actually reassured that the Earthlings, as Svath, your grandfather, said this just now. Although I have to say that it is very good that the foreigners have such weak and underdeveloped technology, as you say, that they cannot locate you, and are also unable to penetrate the Ankar universe. This as well as, and this is very important, that they do not have the knowledge that you have, nor do they have the knowledge of all creation energy knowledge and all of its interrelationships. Ptah also explained to me that it has been clearly established that the foreigners do not even have a clue, and are therefore ignorant of the fact that creation is simply nature and all related universal existence and in sevenfold form, so that it consists of 7 universes in the same space in 7 different dimensions. Their view and knowledge of creation is, according to your secretly acquired knowledge, completely wrong, as is also the case with the dimensions and their true values, which they apparently relate, as Svath said at the time, to the definition of the term time period, that is to say to the past, the present, and the future. Thus their knowledge refers to what is to be expected of what is to come in the future, which arises from what is present, and behind what is already behind it in the past. For foreigners, the future is the time that still follows and comes after the present, but behind which lies the past, as I said. The duration of the present is always determined differently, so the boundary between the present and the past and the future is blurred and unclear, and can only be partially predetermined. And what further refers to the knowledge of the past, Svath explained, is understood to be that which has happened in the past and in the past time, that which was in the past and has been long gone, and is always being ended and completed anew. The stream of time is unstoppable, and so everything of the present and the future flows into the past, and these are the moments for the foreigners to travel. And that is their knowledge, that they can travel the present and the past and the future, but they do not know that 7 universes of creation exist in the same space in 7 different dimensions. Well, but I am especially glad that I have been immunized against letting anything be said that should not be said, if by force etc. they would try to snatch from me the whole of what.
This is known to me, for it is recorded in my grandfather's annals, and it protects you against all kinds of apparatus. Electronic and hypnotic interventions and attempts to learn more of you than that which pertains to your normal life in earthly existence, as my grandfather wrote.
Yes, even the foreigners would bite on granite and break their teeth if these were to invade, but that would be pointless. But let us not talk about that. Let us talk about the fact that the future will be bad for Earth humans, especially in terms of artificial intelligence, but also in terms of what will come from governments against the peoples in the future. Because in their indifference and lack of will, they will simply become more and more involved in laws, regulations, rules, and new restrictions on freedom, and simply let the superiors do their bidding. This, as well as because the majority of the peoples are becoming more and more uneducated and are moving away more and more quickly from the already extremely poor general education, as well as becoming more and more inclined towards addictions and crime, as well as vices and crime, because...
Yes, that is also recorded in my grandfather's annals.
I know, and that is what Svath said at the time, precisely, that he would note this. We were talking about the Earth and other planets in the solar system, etc. at the time, namely that they do not always have the same gravitational pull, but that this is locally different, depending on the subsurface or the internal structure of a planet, which means that the gravitational pull is different depending on the location. This is the so-called mass attraction on a planet. So also on Earth, because this is a basic force, which, as I have learnt, is physically divided into 4 forms, such as various fundamental interactions, strong and weak, as well as an electronic interaction, and, of course, gravity itself. This can be recognized by the mutual attraction of any masses, whereby this attraction becomes weaker and thus decreases the further the masses move away from each other or the masses decrease, whereby it should be noted that gravity is only able to radiate and be effective up to a certain distance. So it corresponds to a lie or simply a misconception or deliberate deception when earthly scientists claim that gravity has an unlimited range. The gravity of an object changes under certain circumstances, as is the case with a planet, depending on how its subsurface conditions change, for example, when they become more dense or thinner and more permeable. Of course, this usually takes thousands or even millions of years, but it does happen. I learnt this from Svath, and so I know that the Earth's gravity is not the same everywhere, and is different depending on the gravity of the Earth's mass. This can also change, but certain gravity ratios are already apparent when, for example, asteroids or meteors fall to Earth, or when space particles of all kinds fall to Earth, which can be calculated at between 50 and 70 tons per day. This was also the case around 70 million years ago, when an asteroid around 11.6 kilometers in size came from outer space and hit what is now the Mexican peninsula of Yucatan, wiping out the dinosaurs and most of their genera and species, as well as other animals, creatures, and other life forms in the fauna and flora. However, the same thing happened around 270 million years ago in the area that is now called the Far East, as a large part of all genera and species of fauna and flora, including a huge proportion of archosaurs and diapsid amniotes, were also wiped out. Over the course of time, natural change then took place from their remaining population, and from this emerged the genera of hairy, feathered, and scaled dinosaurs, and also the bare-skinned and dinosaur-like dinosaurs. From the dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and dinosaur-like creatures of that time, as well as from countless other wild creatures, of which today's scientists have no idea or knowledge. Further new genera and species ultimately developed over the course of millions of years, and then over many millions of years. As a result of which the most distant post-dinosaur descendants, such as crocodiles, evolved and are still evolving today. For example, crocodiles, caimans, elephants, all kinds of cattle, birds, snakes, fish, mice and rats, as well as wolves, bears, turtles, manta rays, etc., and the entire fauna and flora emerged, which today is more diverse than ever before, of which many tens of thousands have not yet been discovered. This, just as the entire evolutionary process also gave rise to prehistoric humans, who developed into Earth humans or Homo sapiens sapiens, to which various foreign species also contributed. However, Charles Darwin's false doctrine is fundamentally wrong, as human beings are not descended from any line of apes, as these belong to the taxon line, that is to say to the most diverse genera and species of animals, creatures, creeping creatures, water creatures, and all other life forms on water, land, forest, and air. The HOMO, that is to say human beings, is the only species on Earth with a conscious mind, conscious reason, and a fully conscious and clear ability to make decisions, and also with a conscious ability to act.
This is all known to me, but now this, of which I told you the other day that I was bringing you something. I have it here now, and you can use it here as we have our conversation when I come here and dictate it to you. It is an article that you wrote in Bülow in August 1949 and sent to the editors of the then newly founded Zürcher Unterländer, to which you received a very angry reply from a Mr. Steinemann, who was a friend of your teacher Frey, and like him, a believer in religion. Apparently, the two of them talked about your article together. At any rate, Teacher Frey held you back the next day, or the day after that in the afternoon after the lesson, after which this Mr. Steinemann appeared and confronted you together with him in the classroom, where you were insulted and called a godless lout, and also a very damnable dog and dirty dog and other nasty words, and then finally badly beaten with his blackthorn cane, as my grandfather noted in his annals.
I have long since forgotten that, but now that you mention it, it comes back to me. But the whole thing is long gone, and I actually felt more sorry for the two sectarians back then than I did for the beatings, because I could not understand how adults and the teaching staff and newspaper clerk could believe in such nonsense as religion. Oh yes, I can still half remember this. Someone from this newspaper also appeared in Niederflachs and called me nasty names about it. But I understood that he belonged to the same religious sect as Teacher Frey and the man from the newspaper who came to the school. As a result, the article was not published, but Svath took it. I did not send it to any more newspapers because I was satisfied with what happened to me at school and the man who shouted at me at home.
Unfortunately, I do not have enough time to read all the articles you still have, but I want to copy them and read them later. But now I want you to insert the article you wrote back then when I dictate it to you.
But then it will take you some time and even several days to dictate the whole of our conversation.
That will be so, for I will have to spread everything over several days, for I also have my duties to attend to.
That is clear, and it should also not be rushed. Consequently, time is not an issue.
I also think so. But now I want you to insert everything we have discussed here, which I will dictate to you over the next few days. But what I want you to look at here on my device is what I have photographed, and will dictate to you when I get back.
Imaginations, delusions of faith and hysteria, delusions of faith, etc.
The human being's thoughts, like everything of fauna and flora and everything that exists in general, generate energetic swinging waves which, depending on their strength and intensity of thought, spread in the nearer or further surroundings or even worldwide, and are even deposited depending on their type and strength. The human being's thought-swinging waves are emitted in a close or wider environment by individuals, but if they are of the same nature and are cultivated by groups of human beings together at gatherings and are consciously or subliminally cherished in terms of faith, the thought-swinging waves are then deposited. This inevitably happens when groups mentally and also verbally orientate themselves towards something specific, real or imaginary, and are therefore preoccupied with strong thoughts, especially religiously sectarian and possibly blindly fanatical. If the delusion of faith is pursued in common by those with similar thoughts, the power of the swinging waves of thought accumulates, which, as mentioned, is inevitably the case, especially with increasing religious faith and thus at religious gatherings. At the same time, believers jointly direct their thoughts of faith towards something cultic and imaginary, and generate forces of faith and thus strong vibrations of faith, which then spread worldwide and, due to their strength, are also deposited in the carrier gases of the atmosphere. Of course, this will also happen in the future without the masses of believers becoming aware of this whole process, just as these pseudo-thinkers will not be able to realize in any wise that their confused vibrations of faith will have such an effect that they will influence the thoughts of countless other fellow human beings, and thus immensely strengthen the delusional belief of many like-minded believers, as if hypnotically, turning them more and more into fanatical and wild believers in religion and sectarianism. As a result, every form of religious delusion continues to expand unchecked and uncontrollably and spreads rapidly worldwide, whereby more and more believers join together to form religious groups or sectarian organizations. These then turn more and more to all that is evil, insane and wrong with regard to faith, as they also fanatically lean towards increasingly wise religious ausartungs in this respect, which ultimately leads inevitably to suicides and mass suicides. Of course, clever believers, sectarians, sect gurus, religious scholars, clerics and other religious freaks etc. do not want to admit this, so they vehemently deny that deep down in the character of all religious believers, hatred and revenge as well as murder and manslaughter lurk and erupt immediately when this is demanded and given, or when the excitement demands it or the opportunity presents itself. When war or battle is called for, then all the believers in the military armies are still being consecrated by priests etc., in order to then be supposedly protected by an imaginary god in war or battle, and to murder, thereby sanctifying the murder of fellow human beings, and otherwise still being commanded by state laws. And this will prove to be particularly true in Eastern Europe, when the new millennium sees the realization and repetition of what Adolf Hitler and his henchmen in the German Nazi Reich had already done for the final victory in the last World War. When the Hitler Youth, abbreviated to HJ, was created, and many adolescents were unscrupulously sent to their deaths as cannon fodder. It was probably in the month of September or October 1944, when I was still a boy with Svath, that I saw war carnage in the Nazi Reich, when adolescents aged 15 or 16 fought and died alongside older soldiers. Many of the boys cried and trembled with fear, something I will never forget and can still see before my eyes today. This, as well as the fact that, as Svath said, the boys' war equipment was extremely inadequate, and the whole mission was nothing more than an evil and absolutely senseless slaughter of human lives. And this is to be repeated in the future, because American war advisors will advise a warmonger and madman in Eastern Europe in such a way that he, as in the hopeless final war of the Nazi Empire, will enlist adolescents for the war that will be provoked, with the Soviet Union under the patronage of America and in the sense of its desire for world domination. And the big deal in all this will be that many, and dozens, of the world's powerful states and peoples, misled by America, will display a very strange behavior in this coming war out of cowardly fear or out of America friendliness. The result will be a strange world war, but one that will be waged by many states only indirectly and cowardly, namely by providing only indirect support through the supply of money and weapons to the country dependent on America in order to defeat the Soviet Union in accordance with America's traditional world domination behavior, and thus support America in its evil and deceitful endeavors. And that the new Germany, or the then existing part of the Nazi leadership, will then provoke another war through their partisan and anti-peaceful decisions and wrong actions, as well as the supply of weapons, which could affect and also infest the new Germany, will not be realized by the irresponsible state leaders who are incapable of thinking ahead. This will also be the case with regard to the mere purposeful lie of friendship with America, which will be maintained fearfully and cowardly, as well as the alleged willingness to help the distant descendants of the Holocaust. In addition to the 5 main religions of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism, there is also Confucianism, which is at home in China and, along with Buddhism and Taoism, harbors three teachings. Something should be said about this that is not actually known to believers of other religions, but is worth knowing and remembering. The name Confucius is actually Latinized from the Chinese Kong Chiu, or Kong Fuzi, or Kong Zi. He was born and died in the city of Khufu, which belonged to the state of Lu. He was a Chinese philosopher and lived from 551 to 479 BC during the Eastern Zhou dynasty. The teachings of Confucius have characterized Chinese culture and society, or at least the people who believe in Confucius, since their emergence, but not the actions of those in power since time immemorial. This is because they act contrary to Confucianism, which taught the teachings of humanity, morality, righteousness, wisdom, and trustworthiness, whereby these Confucian values are traditionally regarded as philosophical concepts and also as political and religious ideas. The Confucianism teaching Rujia is referred to in China as the school of scholars, although the term Confucianism goes back to Christian missionaries who adhered to Confucius and revered him as a role model and ideal, as his teaching of morality and his own way of life were also effectively judged to be exemplary, not only in China but also across the states that are now Korea, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, and Vietnam, etc. The term Confucianism was also used in Europe after the 16th century. After the 16th century, the teaching also found followers in Europe through the missionary Matteo Ricci and gained a wide foothold, as a result of which Father Prospero Intercetta translated the Confucius writings into Latin in 1687 and made them known. The five main religions themselves have given rise to secret religions that are still unknown to religious scholars today, which exist in silence alongside the various secret religions and religious communities that are often only halfway known to them, but to which they generally also have no direct insight or access. This is the case, for example, in the Dervish orders, the Druze, Yazidi, Sunni and Shia forms of Islam, then in Judaism, the Lev Tahor, whose members are accused of child abuse, or the Haredi Burqa, Orthodox and non-Orthodox Judaism, as well as Reform, Conservative and Reconstructionist Judaism, Chabad Lubavitch. In Buddhism, for example, there are the Nyingma, Theravada, Hinayana, Vajrayana and Mahayana sects. Then in Hinduism there are Vishnuism, Shaktism and Shivaism as the best-known faiths, in which, among many other things, around 330 million gods and goddesses make up this religion, into which clergymen of other religions have no real insight. Then there is Christianity, which includes the Catholic Church, which is actually part of the Roman Catholic Universal Church, as well as the evangelical and Protestant churches and the Orthodox churches and other Christian churches, such as the Free Churches, the Anglican Church, and also many other religious communities that even extend to devil cults. No, Billy, 2025, but there are also Scientology and other psycho groups, such as Landmark and Avatar, as well as various healer groups and guruistic groups, syncretistic new religions, such as Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, as well as fundamentalist movements in esotericism, occultism, spiritism, and structural sales regarding cults, and, as already mentioned, Satanism. But there are also all the fanatics of faith, the Christian fundamentalists, although there are also various fundamentalists in other religions, although they are called something else, who are part of a very large Christian conservative or Christian evangelical movement and are against everything modern, as well as against abortion and against all progress and therefore against all evolution. On the contrary, however, they are in favor of weapons of all kinds as well as nation and culture, and they also make massive efforts to intervene in election campaigns, which is actually a tradition among these fanatics because they seriously want to reshape the worldview entirely according to their crazy senses. The origin of fundamentalism actually goes back to an American theologian, Torrey, or so he was called, who was active in the late 19th century, in the 1880s, and in the first 2 decades of the 20th century as a revivalist preacher and Protestant religious fundamentalist fanatic, namely in the USA, where he caused a sensation as superintendent of the Bible Institute of Chicago. The reason for his delusional idea of fundamentalism which also exists in the religions of Islam and Judaism, was because the behavior of Protestants in America changed after the War of Secession, triggering a dilemma of faith and even calamities, which led to critical and evil situations. Religious fundamentalism exists in Christianity, Islam and Judaism, that is to say in the Abrahamic religions as a whole, whereby Christian fundamentalists are endeavoring to somehow also enforce their religious fundamentalist convictions in a political wise, and thus anchor their religious delusions in politics. However, strictly religious fundamentalism has become a serious fact in almost all of world politics, especially with regard to radical Islam, which has been spreading outside the home territory of Islam for some time through fanatics of the faith, mainly in Christian states. Europe is particularly noteworthy in this regard, especially Germany, where Islamic fundamentalism is mainly making a name for itself, and it can be said that this has a real Islamic religious inflationary effect, because Christian believers are converting to Islam. And it is also a true fact that religious fundamentalism often leads to criminal offenses. Fundamental Islamism is not limited to the Islamic world, as it is also widespread and effective in other European countries outside of Germany. Religious extremism, which all religious fundamentalism undoubtedly is, actually exists worldwide in all religions and their sects, whereby strange aspects and delusions, delusional demands and delusional rules are often asserted and demanded, such as in Christian fundamentalism, where sexual and reproductive rights are often vehemently rejected. This is despite the fact that Islamic fundamentalism in particular gives rise to strong and very extremist and not infrequently criminal groups or even truly extensive organizations on a grand scale. In every fundamentalism, permanent endeavors are made and spread in the form of convictions and confused values in order to anchor them in the social and political system. Christian fundamentalism is particularly prevalent with regard to euthanasia and sexual and reproductive rights, as well as abortion and homosexuality, which are vehemently and extremely rejected, excluding all rights in favor of them. Consequently, religious lies and means are used to spread this delusion and to powerfully enforce it through politics and make it a binding law. In this respect, sheer fanaticism knows no bounds. Christianity is actually not only the most widespread religion in the world, but also the most dangerous evil of all religious mania in its various forms, with all its very devastating ausartums, from which the witch craze also emerged, which still claims its victims worldwide today. This is because the insane witch-hunting mania or simple witchcraft mania has spread and survived to the present day, with believers in witchcraft still organizing and celebrating the so-called Witches' Sabbath. According to Sfath's precise observations and counts, in the Middle Ages, mainly between 1425 and 1763, well over 130,000 human beings, the majority of them women, were falsely accused of being alleged witches, tortured and cruelly executed in Europe and on Earth as a whole. Although according to earthly chronicle records in Europe, there is only talk of around 50,000, although Sfath assumes that there were 68,314 counts, for which no records or protocols were kept and no records were even made. However, no records or protocols were kept, and witch killings were even secretly carried out in private. According to Sfath, the fanaticism that prevailed in the Middle Ages with regard to the belief in witches is said to have claimed many victims all over the world since time immemorial, which will also continue into the distant future for as long as the delusional belief in God, gods, and the devil or Satan exists. As a result, it is, as usual, the case that chroniclers and scientists etc. base their statements only on assumptions, assertions, conjectures and estimates etc., because it is indeed only rarely the case that all traditions are based on effective reality and its irrefutable truth, followed later and in the future by know-it-all, assertion, self-aggrandizement and greed for profit, the desire to be recognized, morbid and erroneous ambitions of megalomania etc. What has been invented or deliberately fabricated is to be revised when one day the effective fact is recognized and the truth is found. Now, with regard to witchcraft, it must be said that it already appeared in ancient times, namely as women capable of magic, such as the probably world-famous mythological figures Kirk and Medea. Kirka was, always in mythological terms, a sorceress in Greek mythology and the daughter of the sun god Helios and the Oceanide Perse, who was considered the sister of King Aeetes of Colchis and Pasiphae. However, there was also Medea, another female figure from Greek mythology. She is depicted as the magical daughter of King Aeetes of Colchis and his wife Aegia, who lived on the east coast of the Black Sea. However, there was no talk of devil worship, etc., as the false myths of the Christian religions did not yet exist at that time. These women, who were supposedly able to enchant human beings and animals with magic and poisons, were anthropomorphic, that is to say human-like, and according to the religious delusions of the Middle Ages, witch-like female figures. In the Middle Ages, the accusations, insults and executions of witches and sorcerers were always about an alleged desecration of religion, and indeed erroneously and confusingly related to devil worship, devil hauntings, sickness worship, harmful spells and sorcery in general, as well as curses, etc. But often there was much more behind it, such as hatred and revenge, as well as also getting rid of unpopular human beings such as wives, children and husbands. Neighborhood disputes, greed for property, greed for profit and land reclamation were also on the agenda. But these were never openly mentioned and were often carried out in secret, with bribes often being paid. Of course, this was never officially known and was also never recorded or handed down in writing, as everything was done in secret, with the accuser judges usually being the beneficiaries of the bribes. Witch trials, and rarely witch trials, often took place for the sole purpose of resolving social or personal conflicts, as well as often to get rid of unpopular wives, neighbors, rivals, other enemies, or enemies, as well as hated husbands and neighbors, to which completely ignorant and bean-stupid clergymen also lent their hand and money flowed. Bribes, whereby the nasty underhandedness and meanness were concealed and covered up, and innocent human beings were promoted to death. All of these, in their idiotic belief in an imaginary dear God, gave their heavenly blessing to the execution, instead of intervening and calling out against the nonsense and making it clear that the delusional belief in a God and in witches was just as erroneous as a rebirth after dying and death. But these idiotic and bean-stupid religious fanatics themselves believed in the nonsense of the devil stories that were produced, lied about and fantasized. And so it also came about that the main causes of many other witch trials were nothing more than stupidly invented religious superstitions and overall insane religious fanaticism. This, as well as the claims and lies of devil love affairs, devil worship and harmful sorcery, which were allegedly practiced by witches and sorcerers. According to popular religious delusions, witches were supposed to be demonic beings, especially female ones, in fewer cases evil men, who were said to maliciously harm human beings as a result of religious delusions, allegedly possessing magical powers and being in league with the devil. This was claimed in particular by the pathologically fanatical German misogynist, Jew-hater and homosexual Dominican Heinrich Kramer, who had been appointed inquisitor by Pope Sixtus IV, and was the #1 person responsible for initiating the persecution of witches in the first place, and actually bringing it about. This, as well as the book Hexenhammer and the Hexenbulle, which were also penned by him. Human beings, women, men, and even older children, were often accused of being witches or sorcerers as a result of hatred, revenge, and retribution, and for specific reasons. But this has been concealed from the population to this day, and will continue to be concealed, as this was never brought up during the so-called witch trials and has never been uncovered since. So very often human beings were put at the mercy of the insane religious mania and fanaticism of those who conducted the witch trials and ordered monstrous acts of torture due to vindictiveness, feelings of hatred, quarrelsomeness, dislike and greed, and also simply out of antipathy, etc. The fact that bribes were often paid in the process is not surprising. The fact that bribes were often paid, lying allegations and calculated lies were invented, as they were also accused, for example, of alleged sorcery, sex with the devil, devil worship, the evil bewitchment and the casting and wishing of all kinds of diseases, rampantly spreading diseases, misfortune, etc., and of being marked with devil's marks or moles or birthmarks. All of this was also, as I've already mentioned, to get rid of unloved spouses or enemies who were persecuted and finally brought to trial, only to be tortured by being wheeled, branded with branding irons, stretched limbs, pulled up by arms tied behind their backs, stabbed or cut, etc., until they confessed that they actually had an alliance with the devil. However, all of this was never openly treated according to what it really was, and had absolutely nothing to do with witchcraft, but that it was just a well-paid hoax conducted in the form of an alleged witch trial. However, this was never recorded in writing and never spoken out loud, but kept secret to the grave, so no notes or other records or written records were made in this regard, because the money-related secrecy worked as flawlessly back then as it also does today, and will continue to do so for a long time to come. Well, false accusations and lies were enough to condemn the alleged witches and sorcerers to death and execute them. But this also happened if the tortured remained steadfastly silent despite the hellish pain of torture, because this was interpreted to mean that Satan was involved and the accused remained silent despite the pain because the devil allegedly demanded it of them. This was done by torturing all of these innocent human beings, forcing them to make confessions and bringing them from life to death in a variety of wise ways. The types of death ranged from strangulation, hanging, drowning and burning alive, stoning to decapitation and poisoning, all to the howls of applause from the masses of spectators who had fallen into the mad religious delusion. In rare cases, it was also the case that alleged witchmen were quartered alive, although this is still concealed from the people to this day. Those consecrated to death were thrown to the ground and tied by their hands and feet and then torn apart by horses in 4 different directions and thus quartered. This method of murder was used several times in the north and center of Europe at the time, and was brought here, and used as a result of stories told by a refugee from the old East Slavic Empire, where human beings who did not pay the required taxes to their ruler were punished or murdered in this way. This method of murder was used in secret decades ago, and even in this century in the Soviet Union, namely and a man named Zakhar was murdered in this way. Things and events that are so far removed from reality that they do not want to be understood by human beings or cannot be understood, especially with regard to the craziest delusions, such as apparitions of the Virgin Mary, etc. There are hundreds of sects within Christianity as a whole, some of which hide as secret sects, because they do not want to be recognized and even carry out fanatical and unauthorized machinations that even involve torture and murder. Of all religions and their sects, the Christian religion, with all its fanatical, delusional beliefs and their absolutely insane and delusional excesses, abnormalities, stigmatization and very diverse delusions, is probably the absolute ultimate, as the Greek heroic figure saga and demigod Heracles or Hercules is also said to have said about something that can no longer be surpassed in terms of understanding. Well, the vibrations of belief that are deposited worldwide in the carrier gases of the atmosphere remain unstoppably strong for millennia, whereby human beings susceptible to belief are at their mercy again and again, and run the risk of succumbing to them, and thus becoming completely foreign and averse to reality and its truth. But there are also the deposited thought vibrations of many human beings, whose delusions can manifest themselves acoustically or visibly from time to time, over long periods of time and centuries or possibly even over a millennium, only to dissolve and become ineffective for some indefinable reason. However, these are thought vibrations that are deposited in certain places and are therefore not carried on by the carrier gases in the atmosphere, but nevertheless have such a strong effect on human beings that they succumb to uncontrollable fear or anxiety. This is because delusional human beings imagine and misunderstand the emerging delusional phenomena. That is to say, the delusional manifestations of thought vibrations as ghostly apparitions or other ghostly influences. And this ranges from ghost riders to ghost rider troops to poltergeists and other ghosts, and even to audible voices and visible apparitions of the deceased. As a rule, however, the whole thing is really nothing more than uncontrolled thought vibration deposits that become effective as a result because they arise from a deep thought or from a hope or from faith and are deposited in certain places, and in houses, and which become visible or audible here and there or at certain times, after the death of a person concerned, but also of human beings who are still alive. As a rule, the whole thing is not necessarily of a religious nature and does not necessarily correspond to a faith-based effect. Consequently, it only has an absolutely active effect and becomes noticeable in a thought vibrational manner, because intense and uncontrolled thoughts are harbored. Then it should also be mentioned here that the universe has 3 further belts on both sides of the material cosmos, which however contain absolutely no coarse matter but consist of swinging waves of pure creation energy. These swinging waves completely weave through the entire expanse of the universe, but they are not visible or perceptible to human beings, and they permeate the entire cosmos. The swinging wave spreads through everything and everyone, effectively affecting and influencing everything in the tiniest detail indiscriminately, in addition to the countless swinging waves that also emanate from everything and every life form, including human beings. However, these swinging waves also spread, but their intensity determines how close or far this will be, as well as whether they dissipate again, or whether they remain for a long time. This depends on their intensity. If they are deposited, and if they persist for a long time, then they can, like all others, be negative or positive, because all kinds of human mental swinging waves, which, depending on their strength, spread and are deposited in the immediate or wider environment or possibly even worldwide, are characterized either negatively or positively, depending on the form of thought and the intensity of thought. These deposited swinging waves vibrate continuously and are unconsciously received or absorbed by human beings who are like-minded as the emitters of the thought vibrations and accumulate with their thoughts and reinforce them. As a result, the vibrational material is spread and maintained endlessly for as long as human beings continue to circulate this thought material in their brains, and thereby generate the corresponding swinging waves, which resonate and are deposited in the atmosphere and then, continuing to resonate, meet and influence like-minded people, and spread the thought material through words and actions. This results in such a way that the strong and widely spreading swinging waves of thought, which are deposited in any case, are transmitted to fellow human beings and even to the majority of the Earth's population exactly according to the type of thought content and become effective in their thoughts and actions. However, this happens mainly through the thousandfold religious and very often degenerating fanatical delusions of all the various faiths of the human beings afflicted by them, who blindly and erroneously follow the religions and sects and are really deeply ingrained in the earthlings, unfortunately especially in the majority of Earth humans. All these human beings who are addicted to a religious sectarian delusion of faith, many of them completely fanatical, do not or hardly allow themselves to be instructed about reality and its truth, because their delusional belief and the resulting false thinking do not allow this in any wise. This is also because their delusion of faith leads them to believe that their imaginary God would punish them if they were to fall away from him, and thus from their delusional belief in God. The truly confused and insane delusion of belief in God will inevitably and unstoppably lead to a worldwide increase and expansion of the delusion of belief vibrations in the future. These will bring disaster to the Earth far-reaching and deep into the centuries of the coming third millennium, even bringing a climatic collapse for its humanity, the atmosphere, nature and its fauna and flora over the entire existence of creation, which Earth humans will hardly be able to cope with. Earth humans, whose irrationality will cause them to spread into an immense and completely uncontrolled mass, will not only give rise to fears, hatred against people of other faiths and all kinds of Ausartung, but also very often to feuds, family hatred, religious murders and other murders, manslaughter and wars, etc. And the hatred against people of other faiths that arose in the last World War will be constantly repeated by the distant descendants of the millions of people murdered. Many Ausartungs of this kind are deeply ingrained and stored in the character of human beings who believe in religion, so that they are immediately released and break out uncontrollably when something happens that is contrary to their own convictions or when an offense occurs. The human being's basic attitude, hidden in their deepest character, is truly the form of a self-created disposition that is built up uncontrollably and thoughtlessly by storing everything and anything negative that arises in life in the memory and character without processing it. The many negative things that are perceived and experienced are not mentally and correctly processed in a neutral way and put right, but are immediately registered and sunk unprocessed, deposited in the depths of the character, in order to then become active immediately when the opportunity or circumstance arises. This happens, for example, as already mentioned, through religious hatred, racial hatred, feuds and family feuds, etc., but especially through legal provisions in the form that some criminal organization orders murders, or that some murder organization or military army based on coercive legal provisions can call and oblige human beings to compulsory military service and thus to state-determined murders and destruction, etc. In this way, laws in the military are used to create a subjugation of human beings. In this way, laws in the military in the event of war or court judgments imposing the death penalty determine that legally authorized murder is committed, which contradicts every right to life, every freedom, every humanity, and every peace. Through this action and behavior, the malignant, evil and self-disposed malignancies deeply embedded in the character of the majority of Earth humans, as well as the malignant character degenerations, are brought to the fore when the call and excitement for revenge and retribution or for defense or punishment comes up, as is also the case with every sectarian religious belief in individual human beings or in community with other like-minded people. This is because every sectarian religious belief causes a resistance to reality and its truth, as well as a deep, subconsciously founded rejection of any other faith, unconsciously, which inevitably leads to hatred and, in turn, inevitably to murder and manslaughter. From time immemorial, this has always ultimately led to acts of war, which were sometimes openly called religious wars, but which were mendacious, deceitful, and idiotic, but were also labeled in other ways and continue to be falsely apostrophized. In any case, delusions of faith are always behind murder and manslaughter in some form, regardless of whether this is done privately or politically and warlike by the military, because according to the ancient rule of faith, the motto for every enmity or other inconsistency, etc., is defrotate, which means that hatred, revenge, and retribution immediately come into play. Enmity and hatred also arise, as well as militarily with war or privately with denial, causing harm, murder, and manslaughter, etc., when something is forced, prevented, or revenge and retribution are taken. It is equally the case, however, that enmity, hatred, or the urge for revenge and retribution are created when memorial days, days of remembrance and minutes of silence, etc., are held or organized to draw attention to past misdeeds, crimes, war atrocities, or other inhumanities. The organizers of such days of remembrance or minutes of silence, which are intended to commemorate unworthy historical events with fatalities, man-made disasters, massacres, torture, murder and manslaughter, and all evil, etc., have the exact opposite effect on those who think differently of what the commemoration is intended to achieve. Thus, mourning past massacres and evil inhumanities, etc., creates even more enmity and hatred among those of a different mindset, which tempts them to commit misdeeds, murder, manslaughter, and destruction, and thus even more evil deeds arise and come about. This is precisely because human beings who think differently no longer devote themselves to correct, independent, healthy thoughts in any wise, but only indulge in unreal, and completely worthless illusory thinking, which spreads far and wide around the entire earth and becomes embedded in the atmosphere. However, these are strong, harmful, energetic swinging waves generated by illusory thoughts, which, according to their nature, constantly and vehemently resonate and are unconsciously perceived by other human beings and influence them. Consequently, those affected by it do not defend themselves against it, because everything happens subliminally and unconsciously, and they do not become aware of the whole thing, namely because they only think illusory thoughts in terms of faith and are not immune to such vibrational attacks through healthy and completely independent self-care. Unfortunately, clear self-thinking is not inherent to the majority of Earth humans, but only to a vanishingly small minority, as is unfortunately also the case with those in power, who only live according to their desire for power, also for the sake of the money that flows undeservedly into their pockets. But once again, the swinging waves of the religious believer's thoughts are so incredibly strong that they are deposited, spread and radiate in the atmosphere worldwide according to their nature, and thus cause negative effects of faith far and wide, which commonly affect the more or less believing human beings without them being able to realize it. As a result, the human being's intense faith-based thought energies are deposited in the atmosphere around the earth in terms of vibration, and have an unstoppable, constant and repeated effect on the believing human beings. These vibrational effects of faith on human beings who believe in religion reinforce their delusions of faith even more, often to the point of fanaticism, which not infrequently but very often results in enmity and hatred towards people of other faiths, which in turn leads to murder and manslaughter and even war. On the other hand, a strong religious fanaticism and religious mania also arises from the delusion of faith, which even causes stigmatization or stigmata, etc. in individual human beings, which allegedly or really occurred at the crucifixion of Emmanuel, falsely called Jesus Christ. In particular, stigmatizations occur in believers of Christianity, which means that such things only occur in these believers, that is to say in human beings who worship and adore an imaginary Christ as Savior and Son of God. And to what extent the stigmatization marks correspond to the wounds that were inflicted on Emmanuel at the crucifixion or are imagined, that is written in the stars and are nothing more than inventions, like the name Jesus, which comes from the Hebrew Jehoshua and which Emmanuel never bore, and which translated means something like God is salvation. But now something needs to be said again about stigmatization, for this is often, along with various other fraudulent self-stigmatizations, which have been lied about and deceived for reasons of extremely lowly intelligent pomposity, and for the sake of appearances or for some other very dishonest reason, and to achieve something very specific, and will also be fraudulently conjured up in this way in the future. In addition, however, religious delusion and various stigmatizations caused by delusion will also arise in the future, and will be partly approved as genuine and good, especially by the Catholic Church. This will therefore continue to occur due to the delusions of faith of human beings, and also delusions that even trigger mass hysteria, such as about 30 years ago when the so-called Virgin Mary allegedly appeared to 3 shepherd children in Portugal. This is obviously delusional because the 3 children were so viciously harassed by a clergyman about their ungodly behavior that they fell prey to evil ideas and became full of fear until they produced delusions and even dragged fellow human beings into them. Such delusions correspond to something that is already ridiculous with regard to virgin, because Mary was no longer a virgin, but had already given birth to children before she gave birth to the son to whom the Hebrew name Jehoshua was attributed by faith fanatics, liars, deceivers, and fantasists in later times, and ultimately molded into Jesus. This is how false believers created the names Jesus Christ and Son of God. All such alleged apparitions of a religious nature, which as a rule only occur so frequently and differently among believers in Christ, but very rarely among those of other faiths, which are in truth only delusions and can even seize many, hundreds or thousands of believers at the same time, such as movements in statues of the Virgin Mary and weeping or blood-weeping statues of the Virgin Mary, etc. The fact that even tears of blood and movements of statues can actually appear solely through the erroneous religious delusion, or through an intense attitude of expectation, effectively results in this way, as do ghostly apparitions and also ghostly voices. But objects can also be affected by the corresponding expectations and thought vibrations of human beings with sufficient intensity in such a way, which I was able to determine and experience together with my friend Svath in corresponding experiments, that a human being suddenly appears or runs to where he imagines, or where he teleports himself or his reflection. Now, this is in addition to what I have already mentioned, that religious delusional belief even leads to stigmatization, as has been practiced by believers in Christ from time immemorial and will also continue to be so in the future, also deliberately fraudulently, as for example, by Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, who, as a Capuchin and religious priest, first began fraudulently conjuring up self-stigmatization around 30 years ago, and has since acted as a healer and prophet, which he will probably continue to do until God calls him to himself or until death overtakes him. As a devout Christian, he also finds it necessary to act as a soul shower and soul healer, as well as a divine counselor, because he has supposedly received all his gifts from God for this purpose. Unfortunately, I do not know how long this impostor will be able to perform his crazy miracles, because Svath and I have not clarified this. One thing is certain, however, that as a believer in Christ, he is an unparalleled deceiver when it comes to self-stigmatization, and this only for the purpose of misguided and stupid self-aggrandizement and capturing and winning over believers, as my friend Svath and I were able to find out. And all that I have said corresponds to what is to be said for the time being. Sunday, 21st August 1949, Eddie Meier, Niederflachs, 1253, Bülach.
Yes, that should be the article I wrote back then. You will then dictate it to me, but I will have to revise everything I dictated afterwards, in such a way that there are fewer spelling mistakes in the whole. This is because, unfortunately, because you dictate everything to me in this form, I am also being tampered with when I write something private, so Eva and Michael are there to help me diligently.
This is really your work from back then, which you should also include in your new book, because what you wrote as a boy, as well as many other things, was fathomed by my grandfather and you should make that known.
That is why I sent it to the newspaper, which was not a good idea, but now it can be listed in the interview report and also find its way into my new book.
That is after my meaning. And what about this question here on the paper? Why is it asking about country traces? What is it all about?
You would not know, of course. Such tracks were once made in the 1970s. And the question here about how the land tracks in the ice and in meadows in the depressed grass came about, I can only say that these were made especially to please our Figu people, so to speak, whereby these tracks were only made a few minutes before they were inspected, but the place was usually inspected by the people a few minutes beforehand, after which the tracks were there minutes later. The beam ships of the Pleiaren do not produce any tracks when they land, so the Menara landing tracks were also specially made, as in the other three places. This was also the case at Center House Square, when a large round landing track was melted out of the thick ice within a few minutes. I can only say once again that these tracks were made especially demonstratively, because in reality there are no such land tracks on any of your beam ships. But that is probably not so important to know. What is obviously important for the Earthlings in this letter, however, is what will happen with regard to the obviously crazy and insane man in America who was elected president for the second time, Trump. All I really want to say about him is that he is proving himself to be a personality aberration, a mindless, loudmouthed, selfish and pathologically stupid and simple-minded person, as well as a completely unsuitable and also very dangerous ruler, who, without thinking, threatens to plunge the whole world and all countries into a catastrophe. Making himself look idiotic and lowly intelligent, he provokes hostility all around. And he also believes that, as a deluded thinker and sectarian, with the help of an imaginary god, he can enforce America's already traditional hegemonic wishes and fully achieve and fulfill the world domination of the USA. In order to fulfill this delusion, no means is bad and mean enough for him, and he even accepts a world hostility against America and another destructive world war, which could become very bad and evil not only for Earth humans, but even for the planet, nature and its fauna and flora. And that yet another madman can play a part in it. This megalomaniac copyright 2025 at Billy Edward Albert Meier. Simyase Silver Star Center. Hinter Schmidrüti 1225-8495 Schmidrüti. Switzerland Elon Musk, who has absolutely no idea whatsoever about how to govern, is letting the barrel of all low intelligence and all unrighteousness overflow, and threatens to totally destroy everything righteous. He will even be appointed by the lunatic Trump to control the state budget, where Trump is the mastermind of what evil is to come. And the fact that he has, as you said, taken the helm unrighteously by, that will only lead to him making the already alarming disorder of the world even worse with his hegemonic behavior. But he is not only making enemies in the wider world, but also in America, including in the Supreme Court, among the Republicans and among some of the people, as I have seen together with Bermunda. There will even be demonstrations against him and calls for him to be deposed and imprisoned. But that does not change the fact that the power-hungry Harris would also have wreaked havoc if she had been at the helm. She is as partisan as everyone else. She would have fueled and supported the war in Ukraine even more than the Russia hater Biden did. Because she is so vehemently taken with the warmonger Zelensky that she knows no bounds in lifting him up and railing against Russia. Zelensky, as Bermunda noted, is said to be an unspeakably cowardly human being and only pretends to be great when he is protected all around by bodyguards. This, like Netanyahu and also the majority of others around the world who call themselves loud-mouthed rulers and only want to achieve or maintain peace with evil violence, as she said. She also said that she could fathom that the majority of rulers worldwide are not only autocratic, but also cowardly, completely unscrupulous and effectively nefarious, so that all of them would unscrupulously betray their people and send them off to war as cannon fodder, while they themselves, out of cowardice, would only dare to go to a toilet or a lavatory, protected by bodyguards, and hide away. The majority of these loud-mouthed, power-grabbing, incompetent government heroes, both male and female, she really said, were only great and strong when they felt safe in a government, and could exert themselves powerfully and do anything wrong and irresponsible at their own discretion and will, without the will and consent of their people. Then they would feel correct, satisfied and untouchable, especially when they are able to bully the lowly intelligent and therefore the non-thinking and thoroughly indifferent members of the population, and allow themselves to be worshipped by them. Namely by those who are absolutely disinterested in really good and right governance and cheer them on for their lousy mismanagement, allowing them to do what they want without being asked and unhindered.
That is unfortunately the case. Because as long as this is allowed by the peoples, and not everything is changed for the better, nothing changes that leads to real peace among the peoples and the rights of human beings.
Unfortunately, that is the case. Nothing changes for the better, only for the worse. The truth is that on Earth, mainly in politics and also in Switzerland, if something cannot be enforced, then new laws, regulations and ordinances, etc. are simply passed without or with the will of the people who are being lied to and deceived.
The wrong state of affairs, as it prevails on Earth in this respect, was also common in our country, and it was only when the great ball of peace came, as we call it more than 52,000 years ago, that everything that was good and wrong changed in such a way that slowly everything really changed for the better. But this took a great many human lives. The individual human beings awoke and found their way out of their indifference, and also out of all that was wrong and evil, as a result of which effective peace was able to develop and became omnipresent.
It was not good that many human beings had to die for it, but the success is nevertheless gratifying. Unfortunately, we here on Earth are dominated by evil disunity, hatred, greed for wealth, greed for power and partisanship, which leads to those in power, such as the mass murderers and those in power in Israel and Ukraine, being praised to the skies for their war crimes, while others, such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and Russia, are wished to hell. The fact that they all act equally wrongly, criminally, and inhumanely is specified by the bias and trivialized for those who are biased. In the Middle East, for example, only Hezbollah, Hamas, and Arabs or Palestinians in general are demonized in a partisan manner, while the Israelis are praised to the skies, despite the fact that they are now doing the same thing that was done to their ancestors in the German Reich by the Nazis. What was criminally done to the Israeli ancestors in the last World War with the Holocaust is now being repeated in Palestine with the help of America, and this time it is the Israelis who are carrying out the Holocaust. And as I said, with the help of America's hegemonic mania and weapons, which also wants to extend its mania to Palestine, as well as to other Arab states. And there is no mention of this, at least not yet, but it will come. Just as there is no mention of the fact that not only Hamas has taken hostages, but also Israel, and indeed many more and even hundreds of times more than Hamas. In Israel, these hostages are being held in prison as prisoners, but the world public is not being informed about these thousands of hostages, so it is not being told what is really going on, and only the Israeli army of mass murderers and its chief mass murderer Netanyahu are being exalted to the skies. And the same is happening in Ukraine, where the warmongering Zelensky, under the patronage of America, is having his army murder and destroy not only in Ukraine but also in Russia by the meter. So the copyright 2025 at Billy Edward Albert Meier, Sim Yase, Silver Star Center, Hinter Schmidruti, 1225-8495 Schmidruti, Switzerland. The beams bend, which is widely accepted around the world. The fact that Russia, on the other hand, is being viciously made the sow and the devil, Putin is not to be protected or better portrayed, because he is also a culprit, is nothing more than partisanship and blazing fear of America. Namely that its rulers can impose sanctions on any country and infiltrate their agents through secret services, and assassinate the government's key figures or even have U.S. military forces invade the country if they are against hegemonistic America. It should be understood that America's rulers, at least the majority of them, and the shadow government, which consists of millionaires and multimillionaires, have always wanted might over Earth and its humanity. And all those states who, out of fear of America or out of pure American friendliness, cheer Zelensky on and supply weapons and money, etc. to Ukraine, are vehemently helping to achieve this. In Europe, the Nazi crew of rulers in Germany in particular is leading the way, but France is following on its heels, at least the clique that is rallying around President Macron.
What you say cannot be disputed, because it corresponds to the truth.
Otherwise, I would not also be saying it. It is indeed reality and its truth, and this cannot be eradicated with lies, counter-lies, delusional fantasies, and delusional beliefs, etc., not even the truth that there are no supernatural forces. But then I have two articles, which I want to mention again, which I want to present to you, and which you can probably also copy and read later. Here, this one is about neutrality, whereby a question was also raised about this, to which this article refers. This is followed by the article by Berk Tepe from Turkey.
Then, I will also copy these articles, after which I can read them later at my leisure, which we can then also talk about later.
Of course we can. But here are the articles that I will include here during our conversation. And if you dictate to me in the next few days what we talked about, which will take some time, well, then here is the AI article that the artificial intelligence itself has put together.
AI answer article out to
Question. Hello. I have a question that is bothering me, and I would like you to tell me calmly and with precision what you think about it, or rather, what it actually is. The question is an artificial intelligence capable of making neutral judgments when asked questions involving data and viewpoints on a topic? By neutral, I mean that it is not in any wise influenced by any ideology, religion, dogma, interest, or the like. In your answer, I would also ask you to be as detailed as possible.
This is the answer. The question of artificial intelligence AI neutrality is complex and deserves a detailed answer. I will cover in detail the most important aspects related to the neutrality of AI and the wise way a system like mine responds to questions involving data and points of view. 1. What does neutrality mean in AI? Neutrality means the ability of an AI to provide answers and judgments without being influenced by ideologies, religions, dogmas, political or economic interests, or prejudices. However, complete neutrality is a theoretical concept that is difficult to achieve in practice, for several reasons. 2. The training of AI, data and biases. An AI's responses depend on the data it has been trained with and the rules that govern its behavior. Here are the key points. Training data. AIs are trained with large amounts of data created by human beings. This data reflects society, with all its prejudices, ideologies, and cultural differences. If this data contains ideological or biased views, the AI can also reflect these. Internal biases. Even if this is unintentional, biases can arise from the wise way in which data is collected, selected, and structured. For example, if the data is primarily from one culture or region, the AI's responses may be colored by that perspective. Developer bias. AIs are designed and controlled by human beings, who inevitably bring their own values, principles, and priorities to the development process. Developers try to minimize these influences, but eliminating them completely is almost impossible. 3. The role of rules and guidelines. An AI like mine is not just a system that processes raw data. It is programmed to follow certain guidelines that aim to provide accurate, useful, and non-offensive answers. These guidelines include avoiding answers that promote hate, G-vault, or racism, providing facts based on reliable sources where available, avoiding the promotion of specific ideologies or dogmas. These guidelines are intended to ensure that responses are as balanced as possible. Nevertheless, they represent a human decision and may influence my behavior. 4. Neutrality and cultural perspectives. It is important to note that complete neutrality does not necessarily mean the absence of perspectives. Some topics, such as scientific facts, have a broad and well-documented consensus that allows for some neutrality. For topics such as politics, religion, ethics, or morality, which are inherently subjective and cultural, the following applies. Facts versus opinions. I try to separate facts from opinions. On controversial topics, I try to present different positions in a balanced way without favoring one as correct. Universal values. Where possible, I draw on universally recognized values, for example, human rights, to avoid promoting a specific ideology. 5. Practical limits of neutrality. Even with the best intentions, the neutrality of AI has its limits. Interpretation of questions. The wise way I interpret a question can influence my answer. If a question contains implicit assumptions, I might adopt them without realizing it. Conflicts between values. In some cases, universal values may conflict with each other. For example, freedom of expression versus respect for diversity, making it difficult to maintain a neutral position. Context and ambiguity. Without a clear context, my answers may come across as biased or inappropriate, not on purpose, but due to technical limitations. 6. How do I ensure a neutral approach? Despite the limitations described, my design is to provide answers that are as neutral as possible by drawing on reliable sources. I rely on objective and verifiable information. Presenting different perspectives. I strive to present different points of view on controversial topics without favoring one. Have no personal interests. I have no personal opinions or preferences as I have no emotions, beliefs, or interests. 7. Conclusion. In theory, an AI can be designed so that it is neutral. In practice, however, complete neutrality is not achievable due to biases in the training data, human design decisions, and the complexity of the issues being addressed. However, it is possible to come close to neutrality through strategies to minimize biases and promote a balanced approach.
Question. What is neutrality, or how should neutrality be defined?
Answer by AI. Neutrality, from my AI perspective, is a state of impartiality and balance in which no perspective, ideology, or interest is favored over another. It is an attitude in which judgments or actions are not influenced by emotions, personality preferences, or cultural contexts, but are based solely on an objective and neutral assessment of data and circumstances. Characteristics of neutrality. 1. Absolute impartiality. Neutrality means not taking sides or harboring prejudices. It is about evaluating a situation or problem without external influences such as personal opinions or social pressure. 2. Balanced assessment of information. All available perspectives are considered with equal attention and without prejudice, recognizing the intrinsic value of each viewpoint. 3. Non-interference. Neutrality often involves refraining from actions that could influence an outcome, especially in ethical or political contexts. For example, neutrality in a conflict means not actively supporting any of the parties involved. 4. Logical consistency. Neutrality requires the application of a coherent set of rules that are applied uniformly regardless of the context. 5. Transparent methodology. A neutral stance does not hide the decision-making process, but makes it explicit to show that there is no hidden manipulation or bias. Neutrality from my perspective. As an artificial intelligence, my understanding of neutrality is based on processing information and following predetermined rules. However, it is important to emphasize that absolute neutrality is an ideal that is rarely fully achieved. This is because any system, even the most objective, is designed and programmed by human beings who inevitably bring values, priorities, or assumptions to the design. My neutrality, for example, is due to the following factors. I have no emotions and therefore feel neither sympathy nor antipathy. I do not pursue any political, social, or cultural agendas. However, my neutral point is determined by predetermined rules and a worldview that reflects the general human consensus or the intention of my developers. Limits of neutrality. Neutrality also has limits for an artificial intelligence like me. Neutrality versus justice. Remaining neutral could mean ignoring situations where one side is obviously disadvantaged or the victim of injustice. This raises an ethical question. Is neutrality always correct in such cases? Interpretation of information. The selection and presentation of information, even when trying to be neutral, can influence the perceived meaning. Conclusion. In my view, neutrality is a technical and conceptual seal that should minimize bias as much as possible. Nevertheless, neutrality is not an empty or passive position. It requires an active practice of careful analysis, a deep understanding of the data, and a commitment to impartiality. In my case, it is a crucial aspect of gaining user trust, but remains constrained by the limits of my programming and the human nature of the information I process.
And here is the other article.
On the earthly historical linguistic traces of creation energy. Teaching Symbols 1. Berktepe, Turkey. Introductory remark.
In the earliest earthly cultural histories, religions, philosophical and mythological narratives, it is always a matter of a certain story of origin and creation, which was created and born out of a so-called void, a chaotic mess or a nothingness, However, it has been thoroughly proven that the aforementioned fairy tale-like accounts, whose erroneous interpretations still captivate many believers in their non-thinking, do not correspond to a tiny piece of truth. As Billy's book, Genesis in particular, writes down in great detail and explains several times that the root of all creation did not come about in this way at all. In the course of time, the truthful core of creation energy teaching has been distorted beyond recognition several times, namely through erroneous attempts at interpretation, attributions of meaning, and even deliberate misrepresentations, so that the reality-related ambiguity still has an effect on the majority of Earth humans today. It should therefore be clarified and emphasized once and for all that the following analysis of the various truthful illustrations of the creation energy teaching symbols is merely an indication that the creation energy teaching and the associated symbols that were once taught and equally handed down on Earth, whose originator is the Universal Herald Nocademian and can be traced back to him, were recorded in the memory banks and retrieved and rewritten by Billy in their unadulterated symbolism in the book Symbols of the Spiritual Teaching. All the parallels and correspondences of earthly historical symbolism of a religious, sectarian, philosophical, mythological, and esoteric nature described below are based on the mere fact that certain ancient symbols, which have been passed down through the history of the earth, have been, and unfortunately still are, simply misused and misunderstood by being redesigned and used to convey untruthful values with the hidden motive of creating dubious belief systems, delusions of God, and cult-like sectarian images of fabricated religions. creation energy teaching symbol eternal intelligence, or root of all creation. Although this symbol is a simple full circle, it has a profound effect despite its simplicity. The perfect circle has always been regarded as an unfathomable mystery that captivated the oldest civilizations and evokes the values of absoluteness, oneness, renewal, wholeness, harmony, emptiness, wheel, maturation, sun, unconditionality, infinity, immensity, incomprehensibility, completion, perfection, timelessness, center and cycle, and so on. And, in particular, the pi number, which still needs to be corrected and finally solved, is closely related to the calculation of the area of a circle. The following explanations deal with the relationships between this symbol and earthly history. As I have noted, in Chinese, an exact equivalent in Chinese philosophy that I found during my research is the symbol term called wuji. This term is synonymous with something boundless or something infinite, or a peak of nothingness, which is represented as a simple empty circle. It is a primordial state of the universe that carries the purest potentiality and does not yet have any substance that has emerged from itself, as it is the sole originator of everything that exists. It therefore refers to the primordial ground of being and existence, to which everything that exists returns in a perpetual cycle. This description is reminiscent of the extract given and taught in the book of Genesis. Excerpt from the book Genesis, lines 49 to 57. Now alone the slumbering creation extended itself as a force in non-universe, as a form of the slumbering and yet conscious being, in infinity and infinity, uncaused on the outside, yet evolving on the inside and pulsating in life, conscious and creating, through its omnipresent existence, in the space idealized for it by the primordial flame. Scheme 1 combines several key symbols that play essential roles in Chinese philosophy, especially from the perspective of so-called Taoist cosmology. It supposedly represents creational universal principles such as unity, duality, and cyclical processes, which are closely linked to concepts such as yin-yang, and the five-element teaching, or wuxing. In the following, Scheme 1 is interpreted in detail in comparison with the teaching presented in the book Genesis. The primordial creation created from its own primordial creation energy and ideationalized design for the primordial power, that is to say, creation to be created, still unwise and ignorant thus. Seen in Earth-human terms, this can be compared as follows. Just as human beings join together generatively in order to beget a human being, united in the value of the negative, the feminine, and the positive, the masculine, an embryo is created in the womb of the woman in coitus procreation. In the value and in the union of the negative and the positive, this embryo grows in the womb of the woman giving birth, so that on the 21st day of conception, the life energy of creation is drawn into the embryo as the heart begins to beat and pulsate as a sign of creational energy. When the primordial creation conceived the idea that a completely new creation would be created out of itself, but was still unwise and ignorant, there was no structure of space and time and no solid or material existence, but only the endless duration of infinity and boundlessness. Because the creation yet to be created was not yet aware of its presence and existence, and only pulsated and existed in the spaciousness made its own by the primordial creation. This can be compared to the amniotic sac or embryonic sac in human beings, where the baby is safe before its birth, like a growing embryo, which is yet to become a fetus in the womb of the woman giving birth, which continues to grow like an instinct-driven plant, develops in consciousness, and is able to perceive its surroundings and spatiality. The creation yet to be created also slumbered, resting and evolving. Creation was uncaused on the outside, but evolved on the inside, which explains that a non-universe and non-being prevailed on the outside, which was to be created in logical consistency through cause and effect principle of causality, in the outer space of the all-universe, with its 7 belts and its myriad dimensions. However, these did not yet exist, but creation developed energy and power internally in order to then be able to realize its idea of limited and transient creation, material coarse matter existence, externally. Just as the embryo, still in the womb of the woman giving birth, is separated from its imminent spatialization outer world, it is still to be nourished by its mother and become powerful and mature enough to enter its own independent spatialization outer world as a single being or individual, in order to then become effective as an individual. Therefore, everything small and large has become a unity and exists in the unity of existence. So creation is also conceived as an idea of the higher near perfect creation in order to be created out of itself for its own creational evolution. Just as the man and the woman unite in the act of procreation and make love, so that the woman is impregnated by the man in a love-fulfilling wise, so that the woman is fertilized with the man's seed, so that a new human being is brought forth within the womb to follow its own path of life. In Scheme 1, the first perfect and empty circle symbolizes the unfertilized womb of the woman, which is then fertilized by the procreative seed of the man in order to unite with the female egg cell and bring forth a similar being. This takes place within the framework of the creation through the idea, which is comparable to the male seed, although the creation creates a new creation out of itself, as is depicted in the second circle with a dot in it, which is like a fertilized egg. This self-creation can be described simply in a microcosmic sense, with a cell division, in which a single cell divides many times in order to bring forth a multicellular creation from itself. The third semicircle with white and black parts depicts the sexual separation in the womb in human terms. But in the context of the creation yet to be created, it signifies the two-factor poles of the negative and the positive. The very last giant circle then corresponds to the human being finally born and released from the womb, which in the meantime has accumulated enough energy and strength to maintain itself independently and continue to evolve in its existence. In relation to the all-universe, it refers to the new creation that has finally emerged and been created from the idea of the creation, whose endless existence also continues to develop and progress. In Hebrew, the idea of an emptiness of nothingness before the existence of all things also occurs in the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible. The compound word term tohu wabohu means something desolate and empty, which has been attested in German since the 19th century. From the Hebrew tvhy vbvuhav tohu wabohu, desert and wasteland, that is to say, desolate and empty, which in the Old Testament, Genesis 1:2, refers to the state of the earth before the alleged intervention of God. Later, it was increasingly used in the figurative sense of chaos. The true origin that led to the misunderstanding of the Hebrew Biblical Old Testament statement lies in the miserable misinterpretation of the following excerpt from the book O.M. Canon 8, line 31, with the interpretative explanation. The space was confused and desolate and hung in darkness, and there was no firmament. Explanation, and there was no firmament means that there was no matter, no planets, no comets, and no suns, etc. yet. According to the Old Testament account of the Hebrew Tanakh, Genesis 1:2, Luther Bible translation, the reinterpreted and falsified statement reads as follows: And the earth was desolate and empty, and darkness was on the face of the deep. The original transcription of this Hebrew statement in Latin letters reads as follows: Waha ares hajata tohu wa bohu wa choshek al pnej tehom. The word hearts ha-ares in the Semitic-speaking area simply means land or the earth in the extended sense, whereas in the original statement from the book O.M., the space created by the idea of creation is meant. SHKH choshek also corresponds to darkness. Finally, the word tfm tehom is synonymous with emptiness, abyss, or depth. So the meaning can be rendered as the darkness dominated the deep void of nothingness. Also worth mentioning is the term Ein SVP Ein Sof, or Ajin Sof, which means without limit, that is to say, something infinite, which characterizes the absolute relative perfection of creation, the absolute unity of what is always unchanging in itself, and the omnipresence of it in everything and everyone. This concept is closely linked to the idea of TSM Tsimtsum or Zimzum or Simsum, which literally means limitation or restriction. In the context of creation energy teaching, this is to be understood as the division of unity, in which the creation energetic and the solid were brought forth through the idea of creation. That is to say, is still a unity in division, which also points to the emergence of spatio-temporal structures that are of a limited and restricted nature. The division in unity, the creation of the primordial light, as the Hebrew tradition tells us. Finally, another element from the Old Testament Hebrew scriptures is aver ear or or, which simply means light. In relation to the above information, a compound word term appears, namely or ein sof, which means the light without limits, or the primordial light, which at first glance is reminiscent of the word sohar, or radiant light of creation energy teaching. The following excerpts from the book Genesis and the book explain the actual tradition of words and explanations of how everything came about. Extract from the book Genesis, lines 89 to 90. The web of light was born, and the darkness of the still dormant knowledge was illuminated. Excerpt from the book Canon 8, line 34. The condensing flake matter of spirit energy became a galaxy, so it was also born, glowing and radiantly bright, whereby the darkness of space was broken. In contrast, the Hebrew Biblical Old Testament statement, according to Genesis 1:3 and 1:4, Luther Bible translation reads, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then God separated the light from the darkness." Even on first reading, it is quite clear and obvious how concise, conceptually unworthy, sparse and erroneous the statement of the Tanakh version is in comparison to the truthful and to the point explanation contained in the two books dealing with creation energy teaching. In an interpretative explanation, it can be stated that this so-called primordial matter, which swirls through free space as well as space matter, represents the directly condensed result of the central sun of the universe. This central sun in turn forms the source for all evolving subtle and gross matter. These also include gases, electrons, neutrons, neutrinos, and all other elements in a refined form. In contrast to the central suns within a galaxy, however, the central sun of the universe does not consist of the same material substance. Rather, it is formed from purely creative energy, which already creates and produces the first flake-like condensations, but remains completely of a creation energetic nature and no longer has any gross material properties. This creation energetic matter is milky white in color and is visible to human beings as light. Similar to a gross material galaxy, these creational energies condense, form a huge inner core, transform and develop into gases, electrons, and various atoms. From this inner core, they are hurled into space to create and unfold their effects as primordial matter, space matter, and other components, rotating and whirling through free space. These ultimately give rise to the visible gross material galaxies and other celestial bodies. The so-called light flakes, that is to say, those flakes created by creation and formed in the empty space of the universe, consisted of hydrogen structures. All the building blocks produced by creation were already present within these hydrogen structures. That is to say, the 280 elements of life as well as all the components of matter and gases. In Hellenistic culture, the tail-biting serpent Ouroboros Ouroboros, or Ouroboros, is known as the Serpent of Eternity. Several variants of this term appear in Billy's namebook with the following details. Ourobar, the eternal Uroba, the eternal Ouroboros, whose life is eternal Ourobora, whose life is eternal, as formulated in the ancient Greek proverb en to pun or hen to pan. The Ouroboros corresponds in alchemical practice to the principle that everything is one in the eternal cycle of life. Consider that everything is one, because only the life of human beings moves in the unity of unity as a physical material sheathing of the subtle through a piece of creation's energy. Thus, the meaning of life is an evolution of consciousness, and the goal of life is a fusion with the root of all creation. Or becoming one with creation, universal consciousness is predetermined for human beings, so that the covenant entered into between human beings and the original source of love or creation may never be interrupted, and the fulfillment of evolution may reach the near perfect or half and pure creation energy levels. The human beings are invited into the truth of truthfulness in their truthful contemplation and guidance, from which this is a creational natural teaching of fathoming and recognizing. In the fullness of truthfulness, therefore, everything in the small as well as in the large exists together uniformly, which means that even creation energy comes close to its creatures in the context of developing and unfolding itself. Creation energy, too, is not at the highest level of perfection, but it is nevertheless associated with the law of evolution, which means that it is also categorized according to relative perfection, like the tiny ladybird on Earth. Nevertheless, creation rests in the realm of being beyond the form of existence, which is inaccessible and unattainable for all its creatures, and which is inherent to material, gross life on the world buildings of the universe flower. The second symbol, creation energy teaching symbol, creation. Before analyzing the above symbol in more detail, the following explanations worth mentioning are of pertinent importance. In my many years of linguistic research into the word creation, its similar frequency in earthly languages, and its forms of derivation, I have gained fundamental insights into the thinking mechanism of human beings with regard to the actual and natural coining of the term. In contrast, however, there is also no hiding the fact that Earth humans often tend to maliciously falsify, change, abbreviate, or even transform a whole literal value into something reprehensible. An exemplary reference to this is a word mentioned in the 117th Contact Report, which is documented on a parchment about 800,000 years old, written by the prophet Enoch. Hence the word is Javan or Jafan, Yicher, Jafan, which simply means creation, as it is following in the Old Lyran extract. As they are given in the laws of creation. Now this word sounds familiar in Sanskrit as Jeev Jiva, which figuratively means life, existence, the life principle, and all living things. In the name book, the following first names are associated with the Sanskrit word Ifan, the life principle fulfilled. Fulfilled Ifan. Ifana, the life principle filled one Jajfan, the one who fulfills the life principle Jajifa, the one who fulfills the life principle. Other well-known related equivalents are also found in Greek as vios bios, and in Latin as vivus, all of which refer to something living, existing, or life itself. Interestingly, this Sanskrit word was modified and passed down in English as quick, which originally meant something living or something moving, and can also be found in the German language in the compound word Quecksilber and in the extension forms erquicken or erquicklich or erquickung. In Persian, mercury was also called geojive, which meant living silver. However, the original Sanskrit word jiva changed and was borrowed from the Persian language to be mistakenly transformed into Janjan, pronounced as dia-shan, which meant vitalizing energy, life force, and in a figurative sense also soul or psyche, and was equated with the Latin animus. This was then found in the Turkish-speaking world through religious sectarian transmission in the earliest 10th century in the same pronunciation, but with a different spelling as can, and meant nothing other than the psyche itself, which is also still true today. This catastrophic inadequacy of a linguistic regression is staggering. Other familiar terms for creation include the following. As the 794th Contact Report states, creation is called Edafirgul in Playa Yaren and creation energy as Edafirgulanunslan. According to the Figu Bulletin number 67, according to the ancient language of Nocademian forests, creation is called Murado in the context of Omphalon Ir Murado, that is to say, law of creation. In the Timer language spoken by Askit's people, creation is also called Man, also in reference to Ori said Man, that is to say, law of creation. Complementary to this is also the familiar term Dajansini, meaning creation, which occurs in the term abbreviations Dern Universe and Dal Universe, as Ptah explains in the 325th Contact Report. Of note is a certain part of the word in the expanded form of the term Dern Universe. Dajansini Ern Ruan Nitra Pralano, or creation that unveils. This part of the word is familiar to me in Sanskrit, namely as Intya Pralaya Nitya Pralaya, which in Hindu eschatology note, teaching of the end times or the last things incorrectly means the dissolution of all existence, namely an apocalypse. At first glance, there does not appear to be any significant similarity between the terms, but in ancient Greek, apocalypse literally means unveiling, unfolding, or in this sense, unveiling. Finally, the word Dajansini is possibly based on the following Sanskrit word and its common variants, namely Janjan, which means to generate, to bring forth, to give birth, to create, to come into being, and to appear. This was introduced into numerous languages, including German, giving rise to yignome, gignomai, in ancient Greek and gigno in Latin. The ancient Greek part of the word then developed into Genesis, which was naturalized into German as Genesis. The Latin component also led to the derived genus, which found its way into English as kin and means genus, gender, ethnicity, and clan. Finally, another Latin verb came into play, namely as gnascor, which over time became nascor, from which the word natura was then derived, and was incorporated into German as nature. The word Dajansini is thus reminiscent of the following formulations: existence, genesis, edification, elevation, creation, awakening, generation, existence, formation, birth, genesis, design, life, nature, being, primordial elevation, origin, and becoming. In Hinduism, a geometric diagram that is found in Hinduism is called Sri Yantra, which means glorious, glorious means. According to Hindu belief, it symbolizes the union of negative and positive energies. The differently sized triangles form 43 smaller triangles, which supposedly reflect the cosmos. The middle point, called Ibandu Bindu, stands for the universal center, which is surrounded by circles of lotus leaves in the middle, embodying the creative and life force. These elements, which are embedded in a fixed square, visualize a temple with openings to different levels of the universe. Pietasi Surya of the Majapahit. Now to analyze the actual and true symbol of creation. The small circle in the center corresponds to the central core belt that came into being after the Big Bang. The octagonal star is reminiscent of a 14th century coat of arms that appears in the engravings of a Hindu empire. The coat of arms is intended to symbolize a radiant sun, reminiscent of the radiant light of creation energy, or Sohar, or the central sun of the universe, which emanates from the center of creation. The 7 interlocking rings form the 7-belt existence of the universe. The 4 transverse lines at the edges could symbolize the will to expand and contract creation. Another component of the Hindu tradition is the so-called Advait Advaita, which simply means non-duality or absolute unity. It is a unified system according to which the foundation of all existence is based on a single primordial principle. According to this understanding, the term Brahman corresponds to the concept of creation universal consciousness. That is to say, the primordial and immeasurable pure creation energy, whereby the term Atman is that piece of energy that awakens or animates its creatures. The meanings of the following first names also agree with the above. Atman, that which carries the creational call. Creational in itself, Atmana, which carries the creational within itself, Brahmanan. The Brahmana, the wise. Even though these two names are conceptually and literally separate, they contain the same natural essence as taught by this Hindu non-duality, which is also treated factually in the book Genesis by Billy. Hence, a Sanskrit saying was coined to clarify that it is actually the unity in polarity as tattvamis tattvamasi, which translates as that is the self. In relation to the inner self, the creation energy, that is to say, Atman, it is in its purest and original state, the same part of the absolute reality, that is to say, Brahman, that underlies all realities, that the individual self is a part of the whole. A first name in the name book clarifies the true value of this saying. Tattvamas, who is of the primordial substance of oneness, Tattvama, who is of the primordial substance of unity. This makes it clear that what is meant here by non-duality is that the primordial principle of that which carries the energy of creation within itself results from the primordial substance of unity, which is the all-encompassing creation universal consciousness itself. The third symbol, creation energy teaching symbol, honorableness. At first glance, an ordinary reader may not associate the interpretation of the symbol with the image shown. But in fact, the shapes shown in the symbol are a 7-leaved oak leaf and the 3 acorns below it. Tree symbolism has played a key role in the history of humanity and has been used by many different peoples. For example, a cedar is considered to symbolize permanence, strength, immortality, and preserving consciousness from decay, as is described in the book Nocodemian, his successor personalities, and the sevenfold series of prophets on Earth. But as far as the symbolism of the oak is concerned, it is very profound and particularly meaningful to a certain group of people, namely the Druids. In Celtic history, the Druids of both sexes were knowledgeable people who practiced meditation in harmony with the creational natural way of life, striving for the peaceful, harmonious order of all things and true humanity. At the time, they were categorized as priests by the Christian faithful, and their Celtic philosophy was regarded as pagan. However, they only truly orientated themselves towards their Celtic beliefs, which were also fundamentally the same as creation energy teaching, regarding peaceful existence and the balance of all things. The Druids were knowledgeable and honorable scholars in many areas of nature. According to traditional history, they considered the oak tree to be particularly important and sacred. Because the area in which they meditated was densely overgrown with other forests, their sanctuary was called Nemetin in the original Celtic language, meaning something honorable or honorable druid grove. Their meditation site was also called Grail, as this was confused and falsified by the Christian faith with a Holy Grail, which was said to contain the blood of Emmanuel, aka A Jesus Christ. Ptea further explains the following in the 469th Contact Report 80. The Grail itself was a sacred place with a spring, usually arranged on a mountain, which was considered a natural sanctuary by the Celts, and where a druid grove was also established, surrounded by trees and other plants, where the druids meditated in intimate consciousness with the water, the earth, and the plants, and on as well as with the inexhaustibility of life. 81 such sacred places, called the Grail, were intended for meditation by the Druids, and they existed in many places, wherever Druids lived and performed their duties. Now to the name Druid and its variants. In the name book, a first name of both genders is listed as Drugidan, he who teaches the ignorant. Drugida, the one who teaches the ignorant. In linguistic terms, the name Druid literally means oak knower, according to an ancient Celtic language. This can be extended to the meaning symbolized by the oak tree as the venerable one who teaches, or the venerable one who reveals his knowledge, etc. Even more interesting is the variation of this Druid word and its relationship to other terms. It entered the ancient Greek language as dris drus, which meant tree, wood, or oak, from which the English tree emerged, that is to say, simply tree. as the oak is characterized for its durability, strength, stability, and hardness. These properties are also found in Latin as durus, which means durable. The sense of enduring and steadfast certainty was also rendered in German with the following words, which have the same origin as the Druid word: faithful, faithful, faithfulness, trust, confident, comforting, comfort, consolation, comfort. The above words have the following values: decency, sincerity, constancy, appeasement, reverent or honorable reputation, honesty, fairness, justice, integrity, loyalty, moderation, righteousness, probity, robustness, protection, security, steadfastness, unwaveringness, unbreakability, reliability, dependability, and confidence. And this Druid word has evolved into the English word truth, which stands for truth. However, the origin of this English word lies in the Old Lyron word truchi, as is given in the following extract from the Enoch parchment. Las propet Henoch MJL, ego sar las propet las truch. The proclaimer Enoch says, I am the proclaimer of the truth. If the characteristic of an oak refers to the meaning of the word truch, then the overarching value can be derived as something eternally and permanently imperishable, whereby he also comes to the conclusion that truth is to be understood as something fundamentally fixed in absolute reality. In the book Decalogue Dodecalogue, the meaning of truth is as follows: the effective correspondence of knowledge with logic, which is the creative power and the absolutum of all consistency. With regard to the symbol of honorableness, the Druids attach special importance to the oak as something sacred and revered, for which the term sacred in its original meaning actually means something controlling. It is derived from the Old Lyran word heilag, and can also be found in the Gothic runic script as heilag. This word, which comes from Old Lyran, meant control or honor. As an old saying in my culture goes, he who honors the honorable with reverence finds bliss. Epilogue. Truly, the unity of creation and its seven unity order alone is the supreme being that exists in the infinite and unlimited duration of timelessness and spacelessness. And to it we are devoted as human beings, and to it we are faithful, fulfilling our duty in love and peace, in wisdom and knowledge, in harmony and freedom, which are the hallmarks of all existence. The wave of creation energy radiates eternally and permeates all living and existing things. And let the one who truly sees and recognizes reach the outermost flowering levels of the universe and develop in the primordial and the conscious, so that he may henceforth experience the physical material sheathing of the subtle in the evolutionary development of the pure energy of creation, like the balmy wind floating through the air without fetters and ascending, so that the human being may work his way purposefully up the ladder of evolution in order to become one with the allness of being. So these are the two articles. But I have the following question regarding the connection with Asina. Question: as is known, Asina and her stranded crew made contact with Billy on 26th of November 1977 and asked the Plejaran for help. It is also known that the appearance of their people corresponds to that of amphibious creatures. Simya Ase explained that the Asina people came from the Cygnus constellation in the Deneb system, but since the 291st contact report, it is considered certain that they come from a different space-time continuum. As the following line confirms, 291st contact report, Billy. So why are you here again, Asina?
Earth serves as well as a stopover to our next destination. We have jumped back in time to your era.
Now, according to the 858th contact report, Billy briefly continues the name and history of her people. According to his explanation, Asina's people are called Dogan, or dog, according to the ancient term. Then he says the following, 858. Contact report, Billy. And when I think about what Asina went on to say about this, I think about the foreigners and the UFOs that are constantly being observed all over the world. I did not want to say that at the time, but now it is perhaps interesting to know for those who want to know where Asina's distant ancestors actually came from. This, as well as what else she said, is interesting, namely that today's descendants of the dog have had no connection with the Dogon, that is to say, Asina's peoples, for more than 800,000 years. In the same contact report, Quetzal, with the following excerpt with a different spelling of the people's name, namely as Dagon.
Also regarding the so-called UFOs or their crews, who were also the Dagon, the gods they allowed themselves to be idolized as. Many media bring lying stories because they are paid to do so, just as the military in certain countries also deceive the populations through lies and silence, although in some cases they have even shot down UFOs. In the 891st Contact Report, Quetzal explains the following.
Here, you said that today or so Asina will come here. They are still asking what the people of Asina call themselves. Do you know that?
Yes, the people are called Ensamoli, and we call them Dagos.
Well, I did a simple search for the multiple names Dogon or Dog or Dagon or Dagos. I found online that Dagon or Dogon was a deity worshipped in Mesopotamia and Syria in the 3rd and 2nd millennium BC. At that time, these gods were described by the Phoenicians as fish-like hybrid creatures. The myth found its way into the Hebrew Bible and would also be associated with the Hebrew word dg for fish. Dagon was therefore regarded as the main god, who was half human being, half fish. It is known from many contact reports and other Figu media that the earlier gods described by the people of antiquity were in reality mostly space travelers and human beings like us who, however, glorified and adored themselves and acted as gods and creators, etc. Dagon was the main god of the earth. The fact that Dagon allows himself to be idolized by earth humans is summed up by Quetzal, to the point, and is consistent with what I have found. Also interesting is the Playaran designation Dagos the Kind, and Dogon or Dagon are very similar. It is also known from the 519th Contact Report that the original people of Asina were in contact with earlier peoples of the Nocedemion lineage who, through certain coincidences and ancient coordinates, found their way to our Sol system, which helped them to be included in the path of the Playaran Federation. These ancient destinies also include the Earth foreigners. Now to my second observation, which also agrees with the previous.